The messenger arrived at the wrong hour. That was the first sign. Celine had been awake already, sorting dried bark by lamplight in the back room of the healer's cottage when the knock came. Not a knock, really. A fist, hard and flat, the kind that did not ask permission. She opened the door and found two soldiers standing in the dark, both taller than the doorframe required them to be, both wearing the black and gold of the Royal Northern Guard. The one on the left held a sealed letter. The wax was dark red. The symbol pressed into it was not the kind that arrived at healers' cottages on ordinary nights. "Celine of the Ashwood Crossing?" the taller one said. She did not answer immediately. She looked at the seal, then at the soldiers, then at the road behind them, where two horses stood breathing steam into the cold air. "That depends," she said. "The Alpha King requires a healer at the forward camp, tonight." She kept her face very still. That was something old Mara had taught her years ago. The face is a door, and a good healer keeps it closed. "The forward camp is 3 hours north," she said. 2.5 if you ride." "I don't ride fast." The soldier on the right, the quieter one, with a scar along his jaw that had healed at a bad angle, held out a second piece of paper. This one was not sealed. It listed compensation. The number on it was more than Celine earned in 4 months. She looked at it. She looked at them. She thought about saying no. She thought about Mara's voice in her ear, from 5 years ago, from a conversation she had never been able to shake. The only thing more dangerous than a king's summons is a king's summons refused. "Give me 10 minutes, she said. She did not hurry, but she did not waste time either. She packed the bag she always kept half prepared, the one with the wound powders, the needle case, the small clay pots of drawing salve and fever break tea, the scissors, the bandage cloth already rolled. She put on her heavy cloak. She braided her dark hair back tightly, not because it mattered how she looked, but because she had learned a long time ago that being ready on the outside helped with being ready on the inside. She did not take anything extra. She did not write a note. There was no one in the cottage to leave a note for. She went outside and mounted the horse they had brought for her, and the 2 soldiers fell in on either side without a word, and the 3 of them moved north through the dark at a pace just slow enough that she could stay in the saddle without trouble. Celine had heard of the Alpha King. Everyone had heard of the Alpha King. His name was Kale. No family name was ever attached to it in public, which was a kind of power all on its own, the kind of man whose single name filled a room. He had come to the throne at 22 after his father's sudden death during the winter campaign, and he had been running the kingdom and its wars ever since. He was now 31. 9 years of holding a country together by force of will and the particular kind of intelligence that did not explain itself. It simply decided, and then made the decision happen. He was not well loved. He was respected, which in this kingdom was a different and more durable thing. She had heard he was not easy to look at, not ugly. People never said ugly. They said difficult. They said the kind of face that was hard to hold eye contact with. She did not know what to do with that information, so she put it to the side and focused on the road. The forward camp appeared before she expected it to. It had been built fast, the way military camps always were. Everything functional and nothing comfortable. Torches burned along the perimeter. Tents had been staked in organized rows. The smell of horses and campfire smoke and something metallic under it all, something that healers learned to recognize early and never forgot, hung in the air. One of her escorts handed her down from the horse without asking if she needed help. She accepted this without comment. They walked her through the camp, past soldiers who did not look at her, past a fire where 3 men were talking low and fast over a map, past a tent where she could hear someone breathing in a way that told her the person inside was managing pain, rather than sleeping through it. She slowed. "Not that one," the soldier with the scarred jaw said. "Who is that?" "Not your concern tonight." She kept moving, filing this away. The tent they stopped at was larger than the others and set slightly apart. 2 guards flanked the entrance. One of them pushed the flap aside without speaking and gestured for her to go in. She went in. The space inside was not what she had expected. She had expected the kind of tent that announced itself, ornate, heavy with symbols of rank. This was the opposite. A cot. A table with maps on it, the edges held down by stones. A lamp that was burning low. A basin of water, already dark with use. And on the cot, lying on his back with one arm resting across his chest and the other at his side, was a man. He was awake. She had been told to expect an unconscious patient. She had prepared herself for one. An unconscious patient is a manageable thing. You assess, you treat, you do not have to navigate any of the space around the treatment. A conscious patient is a different equation entirely. She stood inside the entrance and took stock of what she could see from a distance. He was tall, even lying down. The cot looked slightly too short for him. He was wearing no armor, just the close-fitting dark shirt and trousers that soldiers wore under their plate, and the shirt had been pulled up on the right side to expose a wound along his ribs that someone had already packed with cloth. The cloth was dark. The packing had slowed things but not stopped them. His face was turned toward her. He was watching her. She had heard he was difficult to look at. She understood now what they had meant, and it was not anything like what she had imagined. It was not frightening. It was the opposite of frightening, which was, in its own way, more difficult to manage. He had the face of a man who had made a decision about everything in front of him, and was simply waiting to see if the decision held. His eyes were dark and steady, and they were looking at her the way no one had ever looked at her before, not with the vague authority that men of rank sometimes carried when they looked at women who worked for them, but with a particular, focused attention that felt like something being counted. She moved to the cot before she made a conscious decision to do so. That was training overriding hesitation. "The wound along your ribs," she said. "How did it happen?" "Blade." His voice was low, not rough. Controlled. Like a man who had decided how much sound to allow out at a time. "How long ago?" 4 hours. "The men who packed it, were they healers?" "Soldiers." She nodded once. She set her bag down on the edge of the table. She did not ask permission to work. She removed the old packing carefully, using her scissors to cut the fabric away from where it had dried against the wound rather than pulling it. She could feel him tense slightly at the first contact of her hands, but he made no sound. The wound was deep, but clean. Whatever blade had made it had been sharp. That was a mercy. Ragged wounds were harder to close. She assessed the edges, the depth as far as she could safely determine without causing damage, the color of the tissue around it. "You've lost a significant amount of blood," she said. "I know. This needs closing properly. I'm going to use thread. It will be uncomfortable." "I know that too." She worked in silence after that, which she preferred. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. It was the one thing about herself that she had never had to practice. The steadiness came naturally, even when the rest of her was doing something else entirely. She was aware, at the edges of her focus, that he did not look away from her. Not at the wound, not at the lamp, not at the ceiling. At her face. She did not acknowledge this. She closed the wound in neat, even stitches. She applied the drawing salve to reduce the risk of fever. She covered the work with fresh cloth, wrapping firmly enough to hold but not so tightly as to restrict breathing. Then she moved to his other injuries. A bruised left hand, a cut along his forearm that needed cleaning but not stitching, a fresh burn on his right shoulder from what looked like a torch impact. He allowed all of this without comment. When she had finished, she sat back slightly and surveyed her work. Then she looked at him. He was still watching her. "You'll need to rest completely for 2 days," she said. "No riding, no weight on the right arm. If the wound opens again, the packing alone won't hold it." "I have a campaign," he said. "Your campaign will be shorter if you bleed out leading it." A beat of silence. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but the shape of one, briefly, before it closed again. "You're not afraid of me," he said. She was, in fact, afraid. Not of him, specifically, but of everything the evening had put together. The seal, the camp, the wound. The way his eyes had not left her face since she walked in. But she was a healer, and a healer who showed fear in front of a patient with power over her was a healer who had already lost the conversation. "I'm afraid of infected wounds," she said. "You should be too." He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he said, "What is your name?" She told him, "Just the first name." He repeated it once, quietly, as if he were placing it somewhere specific in his mind where he would not lose it. She began putting her things back into her bag. "There is a tent prepared for you," he said. "You can rest here until morning. The road back in the dark is not safe." She thought about saying no. She thought about the road and the dark and the 2 soldiers she did not particularly want to ride back with in the middle of the night. "Thank you," she said. This was not agreement about anything except the tent. She went to the entrance. She stopped once, not because she meant to, but because she had reached the flap and her hand found it, and then did not, immediately, pull it aside. She stood there for one moment that she did not entirely understand, and then she pushed through and went out into the cold air. The night guard showed her to the prepared tent. She lay down on the cot inside it with her bag under her head and her boots still on. She stared at the canvas ceiling above her for a long time. She thought about his face, which she had not expected. She thought about the way he had said her name, not as an identification, not as a command, but as a sound that a person makes when they are trying to hold something carefully. She thought about the one moment at the tent entrance that she could not explain. Then she closed her eyes and focused on her breathing, which was what Mara had taught her to do when her mind was running faster than her body could manage. She told herself she would be fine. She told herself this was a job and she had done it well, and in the morning she would ride home. She told herself a great many things in the dark, until exhaustion finally made the argument unnecessary and pulled her under. She did not know, lying there in that tent with the sounds of the military camp settling around her, that the thing that had shifted in the air of that examination tent, the thing she could not name, the thing that had made her hand hesitate at the flap, was not going away. She would not have believed it if someone had told her. Outside, in the larger tent, the Alpha King lay on his cot and did not sleep either. He looked at the ceiling. He thought about steady hands. He thought about a voice that had told him he was afraid of the wrong things. He had never been spoken to quite like that before. He found, in the strange and quiet hours of that night, that he did not want to stop thinking about it. This should have been a sign. He was the kind of man who recognized signs. He chose to ignore it. That choice, it would turn out, was the most consequential thing he had done since the campaign started. Morning arrived without ceremony. Celine woke to the sound of boots on hard ground, and the distant clatter of a camp beginning its work. For a moment, in the first half-second of consciousness, she did not know where she was. Then her bag pressed into the back of her neck, and the canvas above her resolved into something specific, and the previous night reassembled itself. She sat up. Through the small gap at the bottom of the tent flap, she could see gray light. Early, before most people were moving with purpose, she could hear the soldiers, but she could not see them. She checked her bag out of habit, everything where she had left it. She retied the braids that had come loose while she slept. She straightened her cloak. She was ready to leave. She intended to leave quietly, to find the horses, to ask one of the perimeter guards for an escort or not ask, and simply ride alone, which she was technically capable of. She pushed the tent flap aside and stepped out. He was standing 12 feet away. She did not know how long he had been there. He was not looking at her tent. He was looking north, toward the ridgeline where the sky was beginning to turn from gray to pale gold. But he turned the moment she appeared, with the particular awareness of a man who never fully stopped paying attention to what was around him. He was dressed again, properly, in the dark coat of someone who had reassembled their authority overnight. The bandaging she had applied was not visible, but she knew it was there, and she was aware, professionally she told herself, of the slight way he held his right side that told her it was pulling. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "Your men can escort me back when they're ready," she said, steady voice, practical. "I'll escort you myself," he said. "That's not necessary." "I know." She looked at him. He was not a man who explained himself. She was learning. He said the thing and then he waited for the world to arrange itself around it. She was not the kind of woman who arranged herself around anyone. "I'll take one of your perimeter guards," she said. "Celine." He said her name the way he had said it the night before. Not a command, not a use of rank, something else. She made herself hold his gaze. "My work is done here. You don't need a healer anymore." "No," he said, "but I find that I have a question." She waited. He looked at her in the morning light, the pale gold of it coming over the ridge now, making the camp look less like a place built for hard things, and more like a place that existed in ordinary time, and she watched him find the question and decide whether or not to speak it. "Where did you train?" he said. This was not the question he had intended to ask. She somehow understood this. "Mara's house," she said, "the Western Province." He nodded slowly, as if this answered something other than what she had said. "The Elder Healer," he said. "I've heard of her. Most people in this kingdom have. Is she still living?" "Yes." A pause. "She is old." The conversation should have ended there. It was a conversation that had said everything it needed to say, but neither of them moved. She became aware that the nearest guards were a careful distance away, carefully positioned to not appear to be watching while absolutely watching. "I'll take the escort," she said. "The single guard, not you." He said nothing. He looked at her for one more moment, long enough that she had to resist the urge to look away first. Then he turned and said 2 words to the nearest guard that she did not catch. The guard nodded and went to fetch a horse. Celine crossed the space between herself and the horses at a normal pace. She did not hurry. She mounted when the escort brought her animal around. She adjusted the bag across her back. She did not look at him again. She told herself, riding south, that this was the end of the thing. It had been a job. She had done good work. She would not think about it again. The braid she had wound that morning came slightly loose around her left ear at the 2nd-mile marker, and she reached up to tuck it back, and in doing so she passed her hand near her own face, and she became aware, Inconveniently, uselessly, and against all good sense, that her hands still carried the faint, specific smell of the wound salve she had used the night before. She told herself it meant nothing. She rode the rest of the way home in silence. Behind her, in the forward camp, the Alpha King stood where she had left him and looked at the road south for considerably longer than he would later acknowledge. And the thing that had shifted in the air between them, the thing neither of them had named, moved quietly through the morning alongside everything else, invisible, patient, and in no particular hurry. It knew where to find them both. 3 months later, Celine's body told her something her mind had been refusing to accept. She was standing in the kitchen of the cottage, heating water for her morning tea, and the smell of the chamomile, a smell she had loved her entire adult life, a smell that had meant warmth and safety and the particular quiet of early morning, rolled up to meet her, and her stomach turned so hard that she barely made it to the back door. She stood in the cold air afterward, one hand against the door frame, and counted. The numbers were clear. The numbers had been clear for 3 weeks. She had simply been looking at them and reaching for alternate explanations the way a person reaches for something in the dark, knowing the thing they need is there but hoping to find something else. She was a healer. She knew what was happening in her own body. She went back inside. She sat down at the kitchen table. She did not pour the tea. She sat there for a long time, very still, the way she had learned to sit with difficult things, not running from them, not making immediate decisions, just letting the full weight of the reality settle, so she could see it clearly. The child was the Alpha King's. She could not say this to anyone. She understood that immediately, completely, and with a cold clarity that had nothing to do with panic and everything to do with the kind of thinking that Mara had spent 10 years teaching her. She built the logic in her mind the way you build a structure, base first, then what rests on it. If she said it, and it was believed, her child became a political object before it was a person. Rival houses would see a threat. The King's Council would see a problem to be resolved. She had heard enough about palace politics, from patients, from traitors, from the general movement of news through a kingdom, to know what happened to women and children who became inconvenient facts in royal succession. If she said it, and it was not believed, it was worse in a different way. A low-ranking healer claiming the Alpha King had fathered her child was not a story that ended quietly. She sat with both outcomes and found that neither of them was acceptable. Then there was the third thing, the one underneath the logic, the one she had been not thinking about for 3 months with considerable effort. She did not know what he would do. She had spent one night in his camp. She had treated his wounds and exchanged perhaps 40 sentences with him across 2 separate conversations. She knew the weight of his attention. She knew the way he said her name. She knew that he had stood in the cold and watched her ride away. She did not know if any of that meant what she was afraid it might mean. She did not know if he was capable of care or only of wanting, which were 2 entirely different things that could look identical from the outside. She had no way of knowing, and she had no intention of finding out by placing herself inside the situation and seeing what happened. That night she went to Mara. Mara's house was half an hour's walk through the pine-edged path that connected the healer's district to the older part of the village, where the buildings were made of stone instead of timber, and the gardens were more serious and less decorative. She knew the way so well she could have walked it blind. Mara opened the door before she knocked. This was a thing Mara did, not any kind of power, just the particular awareness of a person who had lived long enough in one place to know its sounds. She was 73 years old, and she looked like a woman who had spent 73 years doing difficult work and was not sorry about it. Her eyes were the gray of river stones, and they did not miss things. She looked at Celine. She stepped aside without speaking. Celine went in and sat by the fire, and Mara put a pot on and sat across from her, and for a while neither of them said anything. This was also something Mara did. She had once told Celine that most people spoke too soon, that the truth needed a moment to get itself organized before it came out, and if you rushed it you got half a truth, which was more dangerous than none at all. When Celine spoke, she said only, "I have a problem." Mara said, "I know." Celine looked at her. "How?" Mara reached forward and picked up Celine's left hand, which was resting on her knee, and held it for a moment. She was a healer too. Her hands had felt 1,000 pulses, 1,000 temperatures, 1,000 small physical signatures of things the body was trying and failing to hide. "How far?" she said. "About 3 months." "And the father?" A pause. Mara's gray eyes did not change. "That bad?" "It's complicated," Celine said, which was the most honest thing she could have said, and also the most inadequate. Mara released her hand. She leaned back. She looked at the fire for a long moment with the expression of a person doing calculations in their head. Does he know? She said. No. Will you tell him? Celine looked at the fire too. No. Another long silence. Mara poured the tea when it was ready and handed Celine a cup, and Celine held it because the warmth was useful rather than because she intended to drink it. Then you'll need to leave, Mara said. Not a question. I know. Before it becomes obvious. Yes. And go where? Celine had been thinking about this since the kitchen table that morning. She had been moving through the options in her mind the way she moved through a diagnosis, systematically, eliminating what would not hold, building toward what was most viable. North of the Ashwood, she said, the border provinces, somewhere large enough to disappear into, small enough that no one is paying attention to it. Mara was quiet. I know a town, Celine continued. Vara's Cross. I treated a family there 2 winters ago. Came in from the East Road. There is a market, a steady flow of people passing through. Healers are needed. The nearest certified healer is 4 hours away. And you think they will not ask questions? I think market towns do not have time for questions. They have time for people who do useful things. Mara looked at her with the expression Celine recognized as the one that meant, you have thought this through and there is something you are not saying. And if he looks for you? The fire crackled. Celine's hands tightened slightly around the cup. Why would he look for me? Mara said nothing. He is the Alpha King, Celine said. He has a campaign. He has a council and a court, and 3 border disputes. He does not go looking for one healer he met once in a military camp. Mara still said nothing. This was another thing she did. She knew exactly when silence said more than words, and she used it with a precision that had always made Celine feel simultaneously seen and uncomfortable. I will send word when I am settled, Celine said, standing. And I will come back to see you in the spring. Mara stood too. She was shorter than Celine by a hand's length, but she had never, in all the years Celine had known her, given the impression of being smaller than anyone in the room. She pulled Celine into a brief, firm embrace. Healers were not usually demonstrative people. The work required a certain management of affection. This was not a small thing, coming from Mara. It told Celine what Mara had not said out loud, that she was worried, and that she was proud, and that both of those things lived very close together right now. Be careful, Mara said. I am always careful. You have not always been careful. She pulled back and looked at her, but you are always thorough. That will do. Celine walked home through the dark pine path and did not look back. She spent the next 3 days in careful preparation. She sold nothing that would require a conversation. She left the furniture, the larger equipment, a good portion of her supply stores. She packed only what she could carry in 2 bags. She separated her money, keeping most of it in small denominations she could use without drawing attention, and sewed a portion of it into the lining of her heavy cloak. She wrote down her notes on every current patient and left them in a sealed bundle on the table, with a message directing whoever found them to the second nearest healer, who was competent if slow. She left payment in advance for 2 months of cottage rent, which she would lose but which bought her clean departure. No sudden vacancy. No sudden questions. She was thorough. Mara would have approved. On the 4th morning before light, she left. She did not say goodbye to anyone in the village except the old woman 3 doors down who kept cats and always waved. She waved. The old woman waved back, already out with her animals in the early dark, and watched Celine go with the mild curiosity of someone who assumed there was a logical reason for whatever was happening and did not need to know what it was. The road north was long and cold, and the kind of empty that could make a person feel either free or terribly alone, depending on what they brought with them into it. Celine brought her bag, her skill, her 2 changes of clothes, her tight-wound thoughts, and the particular steady quality that Mara had given her. Not courage exactly, but the habit of continuing to function even when the situation recommended otherwise. She did not bring hope. Hope seemed impractical right now. She did not bring fear either, or she tried not to. Fear was the thing that made people look over their shoulders constantly, and looking over your shoulder while moving forward was how you walked into things you did not see coming. She looked ahead. The road unreeled in front of her in the early gray morning, and somewhere behind her the village she had lived in for 4 years continued to exist and eventually noticed she was gone. And somewhere further behind that, much further, in a palace that Celine had never seen and did not intend to approach, the Alpha King began his day without knowing that anything had changed. She told herself he would not notice. She told herself she was one small disruption in a life made of enormous ones, and that he would be back at his maps and his war council within the hour, and that whatever had passed between them in that war tent was a thing that happened and ended and did not require a sequel. She told herself this for most of the morning. Around noon, On the high ridge above the pine forest, she stopped to rest her feet and eat a piece of bread from her bag, and she looked out at the kingdom spread in front of her. The long gray-green hills, the river cutting a silver line to the east, the roads threading everything together like stitching, and she felt, briefly and with a clarity she had not asked for, the specific weight of the thing she was carrying. Not fear, not regret. Just truth. The plain, full truth of it. She folded it up and put it away the way she had put away difficult things all her life, with the care of someone who did not throw useful things out, but also understood that some things could not be carried in your hands every moment of every hour. She stood up, she put her bag back on, she walked on. To the north, to Vara's Cross, to the small and deliberate life she intended to build from what she had. Her son, she had already decided it was a son, she could not have said why, moved slightly, just barely, the way new things do when they are still more idea than body. She put her hand briefly over the small beginning of him. All right, she said quietly, to the road, to herself, to whatever was listening. Let's go. And she walked forward into the morning, with steady feet and a heart that hurt in a specific place she did not intend to name. Vara's Cross was everything she had hoped it would be, which was to say it was unremarkable. It sat at the intersection of two trade roads in the middle of the northern border province, which meant it was always half full of people who were going somewhere else, and had no particular reason to remember the details of where they had stopped. The market ran 5 days out of 7. The inn was clean but not expensive. The permanent residents were farmers and traders and craftspeople who asked practical questions and not personal ones. She arrived on a Thursday, which was market day, and was therefore not noticed at all. She rented a room at the inn for 1 week while she looked for something more permanent. She introduced herself as a midwife from the western provinces. Not a lie, exactly. She was fully trained as a midwife, and by the end of the first day, word had already reached her that there was a woman 3 streets over in difficult labor, and the usual midwife was sick in bed herself. She went. She worked. The baby arrived safely. By the end of the first week, she had seen 11 patients and established herself in the town with a thoroughness that surprised even her. People remembered someone who helped them. That was one of the reliable facts of human nature, and Celine was good at helping. She found a room to rent above a grain merchant's shop. 2 windows, good light, a small hearth. The merchant was a quiet man named Gerald who had already lost 1 wife and was not in the market for complication. He asked her for 3 months' rent in advance. She paid it. He said no more. She set up her supplies in the larger of the 2 rooms. She bought what she needed to restock from the market stalls. She learned which vendors could be trusted and which counted incorrectly, and whether they counted incorrectly by accident or by design. She was good at disappearing into the ordinary. Mara had always said that this was her most underestimated skill. She did not talk about where she came from. She was not unfriendly about this. She simply redirected conversations with the ease of someone who had learned that most people, if given the opportunity to talk about themselves, would forget they had meant to ask about you. She learned the town's rhythms. She learned who had chronic pain and who would not admit to it, and who went to the healer only when things were beyond ignoring. She learned the names of the children on her street, and the habits of the dogs, and the pattern of the weekly supply wagons. She built a life from the outside in, the way you sometimes had to. Her body changed with the months. By the 4th month in Vara's Cross, she was beginning to show in a way that her heavy winter cloak could not manage indefinitely. She had prepared for this. She had a story, a husband, a brief marriage, a man lost to a fever before the child could arrive. It was the kind of story that invited sympathy and discouraged questions. She had not needed it yet because she had not needed to explain anything yet, but she kept it in reserve. The one person in Vara's Cross who had not asked, and did not seem to need a story, was a woman named Clara. Clara ran a cloth and provision stall in the market, and she was the kind of person who took up exactly as much space as was needed, and no more. She was perhaps 45, with reddish hair going gray, and hands that had worked hard for years, and did not complain about it. She had brought Celine a loaf of bread on the 2nd day, because she said she had seen Celine come in on a Thursday looking like someone who had been traveling for a while, and she remembered what it was like to be new somewhere and not know where the good bread came from. She did not ask why Celine had come or where she was going. She brought the bread and talked about the market, and said if Celine ever needed anything, she knew where to find her. Celine was more careful with Clara than she might otherwise have been, precisely because she liked her. Liking people was a risk right now. Liking people was how you let things slip. But she could not help the bread. She could not help the fact that Clara always seemed to have a spare piece of something at exactly the moment when Celine's appetite, which had become unreliable and demanding in equal measure, was making itself known. She could not help the fact that on the evenings when the town felt too quiet, and the room above the grain merchants was too small, and the specific loneliness of doing everything alone pressed a little too hard, Clara was 3 streets away, with a fire going, and a habit of talking about ordinary things in a way that made the ordinary feel like enough. She told herself this was manageable. She was managing it. She was, in fact, managing almost everything. She was steadier than she had expected to be. She was more capable than she had sometimes feared, in the dark hours of the early weeks. She had a place and a purpose and a growing inventory of people in this town who would notice if she disappeared, which was its own form of safety. The only thing she could not manage was the dream. It came irregularly, not every night, not even every week, but when it came it was specific and complete. She was in the war tent, the lamp was burning low, her hands were at work on the wound and he was watching her, and the air between them had that quality, that particular weight that she had felt and not named, and spent 3 months afterward telling herself she had imagined. She woke from these dreams at the edge of dawn and lay still until the room resolved around her. She was good at this. She breathed, she counted, she felt the particular weight of her own body in the real present until the dream receded. Then she got up and started her day. She told herself it would ease with time. She told herself everything eased with time. She was not entirely sure she believed this, but it was the most useful thing to believe, so she believed it. Outside the town, in the wider kingdom, the search had not yet started. It would, but not yet. For now, she had bought herself distance and time, and the merciful anonymity of a border market town, and she intended to use every bit of it. She was a healer. She fixed things. She stabilized things. She kept things alive that might otherwise not make it. She had, she told herself, fixed her own situation. She had stabilized it. She was going to be all right. Down in the market, Clara was already setting up her stall, and the smell of fresh bread from the baker 2 doors down was working its way through the morning air, and the town was waking around her with its familiar ordinary noise, and Celine stood at her window above the grain merchant's shop and watched it, and told herself she was exactly where she needed to be. Her son shifted, small, sure, already there. She pressed her hand to the place where he moved and breathed. "I know," she said quietly. "I know." 6 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days after the war tent, the Alpha King stopped pretending. He was in the middle of a war council when it happened. Not the kind of middle where you can excuse yourself. The kind where 4 generals and 2 provincial lords were all speaking simultaneously about a border situation that had the potential to become something costly, if not managed in the next 72 hours. Maps were spread across the long table. The lanterns were burning bright because the session had started before dawn. Someone had brought wine that no one was drinking. Cale was listening, and he was tracking the conversation, and he was approximately 90% of the way through formulating a response to the 3rd general's point about the eastern supply route, when his mind did something it had been quietly doing for 6 months, and that he had been, with some effort, redirecting every time. It went to her. He set down the pen he had been using to mark the map. He did so with enough care that no one in the room would notice anything had changed, and then he looked at the middle distance for 2 seconds, just 2, and felt with complete clarity that he had been wasting time. "Give me the room," he said. The generals looked at each other. The provincial lords did not move. "I will call you back in 40 minutes, he said. "The eastern supply route decision will hold that long." They filed out with the particular controlled speed of people who had learned that asking questions in these moments cost more than it gained. When the room was empty, he sat down. He put his hands flat on the table. He thought about the search he had not yet ordered and the 6 months he had spent telling himself that he did not need to order it. He thought about the pouch of medicine she had left behind, which was currently in the locked drawer of his desk in the palace, which was a specific and embarrassing fact. He thought about standing in the cold the morning after the tent and watching her ride south and telling himself that the feeling he was managing was simply gratitude for good medical care. He had believed this for approximately 3 days. After that, he had filed it away under things that did not require action. He was good at filing. He had a kingdom's worth of things that required action and a limited number of hours, and feelings that arrived uninvited during military campaigns were the kind of thing a person filed and returned to when circumstances permitted. Circumstances had failed to permit for 6 months. He stood up. He walked to the window. The palace courtyard was wet from recent rain, and the horses were moving in the far yard with the particular restless energy that horses got when the weather was changing. He made a decision. He made it the same way he made all his decisions, completely, without rehearsal, with a clear head and no softening of what he was deciding and what it implied. He was going to find her. He walked back to the table, and opened the door, and told the nearest attendant to send for Roe. Roe arrived in 11 minutes, which was 2 minutes faster than expected, which meant he had been in the building already, which meant someone had told him the room had been cleared. Roe was good at knowing things. It was, in large part, why Cale kept him close. He was a half-blood from the southern provinces, lean and dark-eyed and quiet in the specific way that meant he was always processing more information than he was responding to. He had been tracking people and information for Cale for 7 years. He was not the largest man in the guard and not the most impressive to look at, and he could disappear into an ordinary market, the way water disappears into ground. He had saved Cale's life twice, which was the kind of thing that did not require constant acknowledgement between men who understood each other. He came in and did not sit down, which was his habit. "I need you to find someone," Tal said. "A healer. Her name is Celine." Roe looked at him. His expression did not change. He was a man who had long since learned to ask useful questions rather than expressive ones. "Last known location?" "A village in the Ashwood Crossing district. She was a resident there until approximately 6 months ago. She is no longer there." "You checked?" "I had someone check. He had done this quietly. 2 months ago. After the 6th time his mind had gone to her during a meeting. The information had come back. She had left. Her cottage was rented to a different tenant. She had not told anyone where she was going." Roe was quiet for a moment. "How thoroughly did she leave?" "Thoroughly." Another pause. Roe was building a picture, Cale knew. He was assembling the available facts into a shape and reading what the shape said. He had the unnerving ability to do this very quickly and accurately. "She left deliberately," Roe said. "It was not a question." "Yes." "Before you initiated any contact or search." "Yes." Roe looked at him with the expression of a man who had more to say and was choosing whether to say it. He chose not to. "I'll need everything you have. Her full name, if there's more than one name. Training background. Any personal details. Mara's house trained. Western Province. She carries her supplies in a brown canvas bag. She has a scar on her left hand from a burn. Older, fully healed, along the inside of the wrist. Her voice is..." He stopped. "Low. Calm. Professional." Roe wrote nothing down. He remembered things. "Anything else?" "She is good at moving without being noticed," Cale said. "She thinks clearly under pressure and she plans ahead. Do not assume she will be easy to find." Roe nodded once. "How wide a net?" "As wide as necessary. Use the full network. I want answers, not speed. I would rather wait 3 more weeks for accurate information than have a false lead sent north." "Understood." Roe moved toward the door. He stopped once. "Am I looking for a healer, or am I looking for something else?" Cale met his eyes. "Someone I owe an explanation to," he said. Roe looked at him for a fraction of a second longer than was strictly required. Then he nodded again and went out. Cale stood in the empty room and let out a slow breath. He was aware that he had just committed himself to something he could not uncommit from quietly. Finding a person required other people to find them, which meant other people knew the search was happening, which meant questions would eventually attach themselves to the situation regardless of how carefully Roe moved. He did not regret the decision. He could not, in honesty, find a shape in which he would regret it. He called the generals back in at the 40-minute mark and finished the council in a further hour and a half, and he made the decisions about the eastern supply route and the border situation and the matter of the northern garrison commander that needed replacing. And he did all of it with full attention and without error because he was, whatever else he was, a man who could hold more than one thing at a time without either dropping. But underneath the council and the decisions and the maps, very quiet and very constant, a new thread was running. It ran alongside everything else, not interfering, just present. He was going to find her. The first report from Roe's network arrived in 4 days. It confirmed what Cale already knew. She had left the Ashwood Crossing village in early autumn. A neighbor reported she had said she was visiting another town. She had not returned. Her belongings were gone. The landlord had received 3 months' advance payment, which was the only forward-looking detail, and a telling one. The second report arrived a week later. A healer matching her description had been seen at a roadway station 14 miles north of the Ashwood Crossing, traveling alone and on foot, heading in the direction of the Northern Trade Road. North. She had gone north. The third report took another 10 days. It came from a small village just below the border province, where a healer had treated a farm family for a respiratory illness using a combination of medicines that was specific to Mara's house training. The healer had stayed 2 nights and moved on. She was on the Northern Trade Road. She was moving deliberately. She was not leaving a trail by accident. The trail existed because she could not treat people without being seen, and she could not stop treating people because it was what she was. Rowe appeared in his study late one evening with the third report and read it to him in full. Then he added, without any particular emphasis, "She is not simply passing through. She is stopping, she is working, and she is moving again. She is looking for somewhere to land." "How far ahead of us is she?" 6 weeks, at minimum. But she will stop when she finds what she is looking for. Rowe looked at him. "We are not chasing her. We are predicting her." Cale thought about this. What is she looking for? Somewhere large enough to practice medicine without being the only healer for 50 miles. Somewhere with foot traffic, traders, travelers, people who won't remember individual faces. She will want a room, not a whole cottage. She will pay in advance and ask for nothing extra. He was describing the infrastructure of someone who intended to disappear without stopping working. Cale thought about this, about the practical intelligence of it, about the fact that she had been planning this for months before she left. She had looked ahead. She had made a plan. She had executed it. He had known she was capable. He had not fully appreciated what capable looked like in practice. "She did this before there was a search," he said. "Yes," Rowe said. "She is not running from you specifically. She made this decision independent of you." A pause, which means she had a reason that did not require your involvement as a motivation. Cale was quiet. Rowe, who was very good at reading the silences of the man he served, said nothing further. He set the report on the desk and left. Cale sat with the new fact. She had not run from him because she feared him. Or not only that. She had run because she had something to protect. And she had protected it with the same thorough, forward-thinking competence she brought to everything else. He wanted to know what she was protecting. He wanted, more specifically, to tell her that she did not need to protect it from him. He was aware that he had no standing to say this. She had not asked for his assurances. She had not asked for anything from him at all. He thought about the morning after the tent, the way she had said his escort would not be necessary, the way she had said it without defiance, simply as a fact, as a woman who was accustomed to managing her own needs and found outside assistance mostly supplementary. He thought about her hand at the tent flap, the pause. He had not imagined the pause. He pushed back from the desk. He walked to the window. He recognized, doing the thing he almost never did, moving without having decided where to go first. He was usually a destination man, point to point, decided before he started. She had made him into someone who walked to windows and stood there. He told himself this was temporary. He told himself he would find her and explain himself, and whatever happened after that would happen on reasonable terms, with all the information present, and this quality of unresolved waiting would end. He told himself this. Outside, the rain had started again. The courtyard horses were being moved to cover. Somewhere above him, in the palace's upper halls, a night guard was making his rounds, and the sound of boots on stone moved through the building the way the building's own heartbeat moved through it, regular and unremarkable. The kingdom ran on around him. He waited for the next report and wondered, in the gap between one thought and the next, whether she was warm wherever she was. It was a small thought for a king. It was not a thought he intended to examine closely. He went back to the desk and opened the evening correspondence. But the thought stayed, the way small, persistent things do, in the place just below active attention, where things that matter most tend to live. The fourth report came another 12 days later. It was different from the others. Rowe brought it himself instead of sending it through the usual channel, which was already a signal. He came in the afternoon, during the gap between the council session and the evening strategy meeting, and he closed the door behind him, which was another signal. "She has landed," he said. Cale set down the dispatch he was reading. "Where?" "Vara's Cross, Northern Border Province, 14 miles from the Ashwood Gate. Market town, population approximately 800 permanent residents. Higher traffic from traders in season." Rowe laid a sheet on the desk. "She has been there for approximately 6 weeks. She is renting a room above a grain merchant. She is practicing as a midwife and general healer. The town appears to have accepted her completely." Cale looked at the sheet without picking it up. "Name she is using?" "Her own first name. Different family name. She is not hiding the name. She is simply not offering a history." "Clever. Change only what you need to change. Who knows she is there?" "Within the town. Everyone, by now. She is the only trained healer within 4 hours. She is well established." Rowe paused. "Outside the town, my contact, who is discreet. And now you. She doesn't know we have located her?" "No." Cale stood up. He walked to the map on the wall, the large one, the full kingdom map with its roads and rivers and provincial borders all marked in careful detail. He found Vara's Cross in the upper quarter of the map, a small mark at a road intersection in the northern border province. Not close, not easily reached without purpose. She had put distance between them with precision. "I want a complete picture of the town," he said. "The road conditions, how long a ride from the capital, and from the nearest garrison." Ro was quiet for a beat. "Are we going?" Cale turned from the map. "I am going," he said. "With you and 5 others. No sigil, no livery. I want to reach that town without 12 hours of advance notice preceding me." Another beat of silence. Ro was, Cale knew, calculating the implications. Political, logistical, personal. He was probably arriving at the same set of conclusions Cale had arrived at already. "The council will need to be told something," Ro said. "Tell them I am conducting a personal inspection of the northern garrison, which I am also doing. We will stop there first." He paused. 3 days from now, I want the road report before we leave." Ro nodded. He picked up the sheet he had laid on the desk. "One more thing," he said. Cale looked at him. "My contact in Vara's Cross mentioned something in passing. He did not know it was relevant." Ro met his eyes steadily. "She is visibly with child, by his estimate, 6 to 7 months." The room went very quiet. Cale stood completely still. He was good at stillness. It was trained into him, the ability to receive information without letting the body respond before the mind had processed it. He used this now. He kept his face exactly as it was. He breathed at the same rate. He said, "That's everything?" "That's everything," Ro said. "Thank you. 3 days." Ro left. Cale did not move for a long moment after the door closed. He looked at the map. He looked at the small mark at the road intersection 14 miles south of the Ashwood Gate. 6 to 7 months. He counted backward. He stood at the window for the 3rd time in 2 weeks, which was more than he had stood at windows in the previous year combined. He looked at the courtyard below without seeing it. His mind was doing the kind of rapid, comprehensive calculation it had learned to do in war, taking the available information, testing it against what he knew, building toward the most likely true picture. He thought about a healer who left a village with 3 months of rent paid in advance, who traveled north alone in autumn, who had been thorough, forward-looking, and very careful about not being found. He thought about why. He thought about what a woman running from a situation, not from a person, she had decided before she knew there was a search, what she was protecting. The calculation resolved. The picture became complete. He put his hand on the window frame. He did not grip it hard. He was not that kind of man. He simply held it, with the steadiness that was as natural to him as breathing, and let the full weight of understanding settle. She had not told him. She had not told him, and she had gone, and she had built a life around the not telling, far from everything he was and everything his name meant, in a market town with good foot traffic, where no one would ask about her history. He could be angry about the not telling. He could construct a version of this in which her decision was a thing done to him, a withholding, a choice that removed him from something he had a right to. He did not want to construct that version. He wanted, instead, to think about why. He was a man who had been telling people what to do for 9 years, who had commanded armies and councils and held a kingdom by force of competence and will. He knew what it felt like to have power over your own situation, because he had always had it. He tried to imagine what it felt like when you did not. When your situation required you to carry something enormous entirely alone because the alternative, placing yourself inside someone else's power to manage, was too uncertain to risk. He tried to imagine this, and he did not fully succeed, but he came close enough. He thought about what he wanted her to know. He could not send a message. A message could be intercepted, misdirected, used. A message was also, fundamentally, inadequate for what he needed to say. Some things required a person in the room. 3 days. The road report. The northern garrison stop, which was not entirely a cover story. And then Vara's Cross. He turned from the window and sat back down at his desk and opened the evening correspondence. He read it with full attention, because that was who he was. A person who did not let one conversation swallow the rest of his obligations. But in the space between the letters, in the breath between one matter and the next, he was thinking of a market town in the border province, and a woman with steady hands and a low voice and the best executed exit from a situation he had ever encountered. And he was thinking, with a feeling he had not had occasion to feel in a very long time, that he needed to be somewhere other than where he was. He needed to be there, soon. The stranger in the tavern had a quiet way of asking questions that felt like conversation. Celine was behind the long wooden counter refilling a mug when she first heard him. She had started helping at the tavern 2 evenings a week, Not for the money. Her healing work was paying well enough now. But because the tavern was where information moved in Vara's Cross, and she had learned years ago that a healer who knew the town was more useful than one who did not. She dried cups, she refilled drinks, she listened. She learned which families were struggling and which were managing, and who had not seen a doctor in a decade because they were too proud to admit to pain. The stranger sat at the corner table with a mug of ordinary ale and a posture that said nothing, which was its own kind of signal. People who were not hiding anything generally occupied space with more ease. He was perhaps 50, narrow-shouldered, with the kind of face that was designed to be forgotten. Not ugly, not distinctive, simply average in every detail. He had brown traveling clothes that were good quality but not new. He wore no weapons visibly. He asked the man sitting near him if the town had changed much in recent years. The man, who was a farmer named Cooper and who had strong opinions about everything, told him at length. The stranger listened. He asked, at one point, whether there was a healer in town these days because he had a problem with his knee that had been bothering him, and he was wondering if it was worth stopping. Cooper said yes, actually. A good one. A midwife who had arrived some months ago and knew what she was doing. The stranger said that was good to hear. He said his sister had delivered badly in a town without a midwife, and he was glad to see the northern provinces improving. Cooper talked for another 20 minutes on the subject of provincial improvements, and the stranger listened and nodded and finished his ale. He did not look at Celine once. She was quite certain he had seen her immediately. When he left, she continued refilling drinks with steady hands and told herself she was being careful and not paranoid, that there was a difference and she needed to maintain it. She went home an hour later than usual, going 2 streets out of the usual route, which told her nothing useful except that no one was following her visibly. She lay awake that night. In the morning, she was at Clara's stall before the market opened. Clara looked at her. Clara had the particular ability of perceptive people to read situations from a face without asking about them directly. She handed Celine a piece of bread and said, "The man in the corner last night. You know him?" Celine looked at her. "You noticed. I was there. You were not refilling that same cup for as long as it needed to be refilled." Celine ate the bread. "I don't know him. I think someone might be looking for me." Clara was quiet for a moment. "Is it dangerous?" Celine thought about this with the thoroughness she brought to all medical assessments. Danger was a specific thing. It had degrees and types. "I don't know yet," she said. Clara handed her another piece of bread. "Then don't decide until you do know." This was, Celine thought, the kind of advice that sounded obvious and was actually very difficult to follow. She was a planner. She managed future risk by addressing it before it arrived. Not knowing felt like standing in a room with a window she couldn't see through. She went to her work. She saw 4 patients in the morning: a child with an ear infection, an elderly man who needed his foot looked at, a pregnant woman in her 2nd trimester who was worried about normal things, and the grain merchant Gerald, who had developed a cough he was going to ignore until Celine said the words, "permanent damage," in a flat, professional tone. She was in the middle of preparing a medicine chest for the following week when there was a knock at the door. It was Cooper, the farmer from the tavern. He was holding his hat and looking slightly embarrassed, which was not an expression she associated with him. "The man from last night," he said. "He came to the farm this morning. Asked me more about you specifically. Asked if you had family in the area, how long you'd been here, whether you had a man about." Cooper turned his hat in his hands. "I told him you were a respected healer, and this town minded its own business, and if he had questions, he could come ask them to your face. He said thank you and left." Celine kept her face very still. "Thank you for telling me, Cooper. You all right?" "Yes. I appreciate you coming." He went. She closed the door. She sat down in the chair by the window and stayed very still for 60 seconds, which was long enough to let the immediate reaction settle before she tried to think past it. Someone was building a picture of her, not approaching her directly, going around her, asking about her from the people who knew her, mapping her out from the outside before making contact. That was a professional technique. It was what you did when you wanted to know the full situation before announcing yourself. Whoever had sent this man was methodical. Whoever had sent him was patient. She already knew who it was. She had known, underneath everything, for weeks. The knowing had been sitting in her like a stone she kept walking around. The question was not who. The question was what to do. She could leave. She had left before. She had the bag. She had the money. She had the habit of packing quickly. She could be on the North Road by tomorrow morning, and if she moved fast enough she could lose this and build again somewhere further out. She looked at herself in the small mirror on the wall. She was 7 months along now. The practical mathematics of moving fast were different than they had been in autumn, She was still capable of it. She was not fragile. Pregnancy was not an illness, but it was more complicated. She was known here. She had patients who depended on her. Clara. Cooper, apparently. She looked at her hands. Steady. They were always steady. She thought about the woman who had ridden away from the forward camp in the cold morning and told herself it was finished. She thought about all the months she had spent building distance. She thought about the stranger in the corner who had not looked at her once while seeing her completely. She made a decision. She made it the same way she made all her decisions, based on the available information, the probable outcomes, and which choice she could live with if it went wrong. She would not run, not yet. If they came for her, she would face it standing up, with the full set of facts in her hands, not running from the conversation she had been avoiding since autumn. She was a healer. She stabilized things. It was time to stabilize this. She got up and went back to the medicine chest. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. Outside, the market was running, and Clara was at her stall, and Cooper was going back to his farm, and the town was doing what it did, turning over in the ordinary light, unknowing and unremarkable. She worked through the afternoon. She thought about Mara's hands around hers in the firelight. She thought about the night she had sat in that firelit room and told her mentor she had a problem, and Mara had said she knew. She thought about what Mara would tell her to do right now. Mara would tell her to breathe. Mara would tell her to look at what she knew instead of what she feared. Mara would tell her that the only advantage a person of no power had over a person of all the power was perfect clarity, and that if she thought clearly she could find the line through this. She breathed. She looked at what she knew. She had a child who was 7 months along and healthy, and would arrive in approximately 8 weeks regardless of anything else happening in the kingdom. She had a place. She had skills that people here needed. She had Clara. She had a community she had built by being useful and trustworthy and showing up consistently. She had a right to be here. She had not stolen anything or deceived anyone in a way that harmed them. She had made choices in difficult circumstances, and she had made them with as much care as she was capable of. Whatever came next, she was not going to apologize for having survived. She heard hooves on the road outside. Common enough, this was a market town, and she kept her head down over the medicine chest, and kept counting out the dried components she needed, and did not go to the window. She could hear Clara calling a price to someone at her stall, ordinary afternoon market sound. Celine counted out the chamomile and the bone-ease bark and the 3 kinds of powder that went into a good wound preparation, and she laid them out in the right proportions, and she sealed each portion carefully into its labeled cloth packet. Work. This was work. This was what she was. Whatever came through the door could come through the door. She would be standing when it did. She sealed the last packet and set it in the chest and closed the lid. She looked at the door. No one knocked. Not today. She exhaled. She went to the window and looked at the road. Empty. Ordinary. A dog asleep at the edge of the market. The afternoon light was turning the stone walls of the buildings across the way a warm yellow-gray. She thought, 8 weeks. She thought, just let me have 8 more weeks. The evening settled around the town, and the dog stayed asleep, and the market finished its day, and Clara closed her stall, and Celine heard her call a good night from the street below the window, and she called good night back, and the town moved into its evening routines. 8 weeks. Just 8 weeks. She had survived everything else. She could survive 8 more weeks. The next morning brought a woman with a difficult delivery. The messenger came at 5 in the morning, still dark, a young boy hammering at her door with the flat-palmed urgency of a child sent out before he was fully awake. The Parson family, east side of town, second daughter, early labor that had been going too long. 3 days, the boy said. Celine was dressed and moving before he finished the sentence. She knew the Parson household. She had visited twice over the winter. The mother was a solid woman. The father was quiet and capable. The household was orderly. The second daughter, Nell, was 19 and strong, and had given no indication during the pregnancy of anything that should worry anyone. 3 days was too long. That was what worried Celine. She walked fast through the dark streets with her bag over her shoulder and let the work fill her mind completely, which was the best thing about work. It did not leave room for anything else. She was thinking about presentation, about what 3 days of labor typically indicated, about the tools she had brought and the ones she wished she had brought, about the probability trees that ran through a difficult delivery. The Parson house was lit in every window. The father met her at the door. His face told her most of what she needed to know before she was inside. She went upstairs. Nell was exhausted in the specific way that labor exhaustion produced. The body worn past its comfortable limits, the face still determined. the hands gripping the bedpost with more resolution than energy. Celine assessed her quickly and thoroughly, and made 3 decisions before she had set her bag down. She sent the father and the 2 young Parson boys downstairs. She sent the mother for hot water and cloth. She washed her hands, she organized her bag, and she began to work. This was something Celine did not advertise about herself, because it sounded like pride, and she was not a prideful woman. But in the work of difficult deliveries, she was excellent. She had an ability to hold a complicated medical situation in her mind as a whole, rather than as a series of steps, to see where the problem was, and what the body needed, and which of her options would work, and in what order. Mara had taught her technique, but this particular clarity under pressure, was hers alone. 3 hours. 3 hours, and then the baby arrived. And the baby was crying immediately, which was the most important sound in the room. And Nell was crying too. And the mother came in and made a sound that Celine recognized as the specific sound a mother made when the worst possible thing had not happened. Celine stepped back. She cleaned her hands. She checked everything that needed checking, assessed everything that needed assessing, gave the mother her quiet instructions for the next 48 hours. She accepted the father's handshake at the door, and the purse he pressed into her hand, and the stumbling gratitude that he managed, despite the fact that he was visibly a man who found gratitude very difficult to say out loud. She walked back through the town in the growing morning light. The market was opening. Clara was already at her stall, setting out cloth bolts in the early sun. She looked up when Celine passed and raised an eyebrow. "Parson girl," Celine said. Clara nodded. "All right?" "Both doing well." Clara reached under her table and produced a bread roll already wrapped in cloth. "Eat," she said. "You've been up all night." Celine took the bread. She sat on the edge of the low wall across from the stall and ate it while Clara finished setting up, and the market moved around them in its ordinary morning way, and the bread was warm and good, and Celine ate every bite of it. "The stranger is gone," Clara said without looking up from the cloth she was folding. "Saw him leave on the North Road last night." Celine was quiet. "Left fast," Clara added, "like someone who had what they came for." Celine looked at the bread in her hands. She thought about what the stranger had come for. A picture, a confirmation, a precise location. She had already known this. "How long do you think I have?" Clara asked. The directness of this was the thing Celine most valued about Clara. She did not pad things. She did not make them smaller than they were. "A week," Celine said. "Maybe 2. Clara was quiet for a moment. She finished folding the cloth. She started on the next one. And then I deal with it." "You are not going to run." It was not a question. Clara knew her by now. "No," Celine said. "I'm not going to run." Clara nodded. She reached under the table again and produced a second bread roll, which she handed to Celine without comment. Celine took it, because she had not slept and she was, suddenly, very hungry. "If you need help," Clara said, "I'm here." Celine looked at her. Clara was folding cloth with the same steady attention she brought to everything. She was not offering drama or rescue. She was offering what she always offered: presence, practicality, the specific reliability of a person who showed up. "Thank you," Celine said. And she meant it in a way that was too large for 2 words to hold, but she said them anyway. She ate the second roll. She watched the market fill. A wagon came through with crates of spring vegetables, the first of the season, pale and early and not yet at their best but real, which was what mattered. The year was moving. Everything moved. She thought about the stranger on the North Road, riding fast with his confirmation, with his picture built from Cooper and the tavern, and the questions about her history. She thought about who he was writing to. She put her hand to her side briefly, where her son had been quiet all morning, resting after the eventful night. "Not long now," she said quietly. Not to Clara, not to the market. To herself, to him. She got up and said goodbye to Clara and walked back to her room above the grain merchant's shop. She put her bag away and washed the night's work from her hands and sat down on the edge of the bed. She thought about the forward camp and the tent and the lamp burning low. She thought about steady hands and the way a man watched you when he was truly looking rather than simply seeing. She thought about what she was going to say when the conversation she had been postponing for 7 months arrived at her door. She did not know yet. She was still working that part out. She lay back on the bed and looked at the ceiling and let herself be tired, just for an hour. Just a single hour of not thinking and not managing and not being ready for anything. The morning light came through the window in a long flat bar across the floor. Her son shifted once, comfortable and slow, the way he moved when she was still. She closed her eyes. Outside, the market moved on through the morning, and the spring vegetables sold well, and Clara's cloth moved in the light wind from her stall, and Vara's cross did what it always did, turned over in its ordinary rhythms, unbothered, reliable, alive. 1 week, maybe 2. She could use the time. Ro came back from Vara's cross on a Wednesday morning and went directly to the study without stopping to change his travel clothes, which told Cale everything about the urgency before a word was spoken. He closed the door. He turned. His expression was the one Cale recognized as the face Ro made when he had information that required care in the delivery. Not bad news, exactly, but news with weight. "She knows," Ro said. Cale set down the document he was holding. "How?" "I used a contact. He was thorough, perhaps too thorough. He asked questions around her rather than to her, which was the correct approach, but the town is small and close and she is well established there. People pay attention when someone asks about her." He paused. "She will be expecting a follow-up." "What is her situation?" Ro was quiet for a moment. "She is very well established. The town relies on her. She has treated most of the permanent residents and a portion of the market population. She has what appears to be a genuine friendship with a cloth merchant named Clara. The grain merchant she rents from is satisfied with her and has no interest in her business." He met Cale's eyes. "She is not hiding who she is in the town. She is simply not supplying a history. She works hard. She charges fairly. People like her. And her condition? 7 months, by my contact's assessment." A brief pause. "She is healthy, moving normally, still working." Cale stood and walked to the window. He had been doing this more, the walking to windows, and he had identified this as a habit that meant his mind was running faster than his body wanted to sit still. "She looked well?" He did not approach her directly. "But yes," Ro added, "she is not a woman who is struggling, if that is the concern. She has built something real. She has been very competent about all of it." Cale looked at the courtyard below. He was aware of something that was not quite pride, because pride required a relationship he did not yet have, but was the precursor to it, the thing that preceded proper feeling. "How soon can we leave?" he said. "I had anticipated this," Ro said. "The road is passable. The northern garrison stop will take 1 full day, accounting for the official business that legitimizes the trip. If we leave day after tomorrow, we reach Vara's Cross in 4 days. The 6 men I mentioned, already selected, the 2 who understand discretion best." Cale turned from the window. "What are you not telling me?" Ro had worked with him long enough that this question did not surprise him. He was quiet for a moment. Then, the contact noted that she appeared, in the days following his questions, to have made a decision. He could not say what the decision was specifically. He was watching from a distance, but the way she moved through the town changed. She stopped looking over her shoulder. She started looking forward. Another pause. He said it looked like someone who had made their mind up about something. About what? He could not say. But she is not running. She packed nothing that he could see. She is still working, still moving through her normal patterns. Cale thought about this. About a woman who could run and had chosen not to. About what that decision cost her, or saved her, or meant. "Day after tomorrow," he said, quietly. "Yes." Ro moved toward the door. He stopped. "One more thing." Cale looked at him. "If she does not want to be found, if she makes that clear, in whatever words she chooses, what is the plan?" It was a question that Ro had the right to ask because it was a question with operational implications. Cale understood this. He also understood that it was the question underneath the question, not tactical, but something more fundamental about what Cale's intentions actually were. "The plan is that she tells me herself," Cale said. "If she wants to be left alone, she says so and I leave." He met Ro's eyes. "I did not ask to have her found in order to claim her. I asked because there is a conversation that needs to happen, and it cannot happen from a distance." Ro looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded once with the particular quality of a man who had checked something off a list he had been keeping, and was satisfied with the answer. "Day after tomorrow," he said, and he went out. The next day, Cale finished the immediate council business with the compact efficiency of a man who had committed to a departure date. He cleared the backlog of signed documents. He wrote 3 personal letters to provincial leaders that had been waiting too long. He read the intelligence reports from the eastern border. He attended the evening military briefing and gave his orders for the week he would be away. He did not tell anyone in the council where he was actually going. He was the king. This was within his rights, and he exercised it without guilt. In his locked desk drawer, the small pouch of medicine she had left behind sat where it had been for 7 months. He took it out once, that evening, and held it in his hand. It was nothing. A reed-wrapped packet of fever-break herbs and wound application powder, worth perhaps 30 coins on the open market. He had kept it in a locked drawer like a document with state significance. He put it in his travel bag. This was not something he was going to examine closely. He slept well, which was unusual before travel, and he woke before light on the departure day and dressed without assistance, which was not unusual. He had never liked being dressed by other people, and had stopped accepting it the day he turned old enough that it was possible to decline. Roe was in the yard with 6 horses and 6 men when Cale came down. The men were in plain dark traveling clothes, no royal sigil visible anywhere. They could have been merchants, or a private security detail, or any number of things that were not a king riding north with a specific woman in mind. "Garrison first," Roe said quietly. "Garrison first," Cale confirmed. They rode out of the palace through the secondary gate, the one the kitchen deliveries used, which opened onto a side road that joined the northern trade route 2 miles outside the city. Cale had used this exit before, when he needed to move without becoming a 3-hour event. The morning was overcast and cold, the light flat and gray, the kind of weather that discouraged people from looking up from what they were doing. They moved through it at a pace that was efficient without being conspicuous. The garrison stop took 1 day, as Roe had projected. The garrison commander was a competent woman named Heloise who had been running the northern border garrison for 6 years, and had not, to Cale's knowledge, ever failed to do her job correctly. She was surprised to see him unannounced, but she was professional about the surprise, and the inspection was genuine and thorough, and Cale made 2 recommendations that she received with the directness he valued. He left the next morning. 2 more days of road. The border province changed character as they moved deeper into it, less cultivated, the villages more spread out, the spaces between them wider and more inhabited by weather than by people. This was the country that had always made Cale feel, inconveniently, something like envy for the people who lived in it. The particular freedom of landscape that had no designs on you. On the 3rd morning after the garrison, they reached the high ridge above the valley where Vara's Cross sat at its road intersection, and Cale stopped his horse and looked at it from above. It was a small town, compact, orderly in the practical way of market towns rather than the formal way of planned settlements. He could see the market already open and moving even at this hour. Cloth stalls, a vegetable cart, the wider spread of a good-sized market day. The buildings were stone and timber, the streets were narrow, the whole thing had the particular alive quality of a place that was busy, because it was genuinely useful rather than because someone had planned for it to be. Somewhere in that town was a woman he had not spoken to in 7 months. He felt, looking at it from the ridge, the specific weight of the moment, not anxiety. He did not find anxiety useful and had mostly trained it out of himself, but something adjacent, the thing that preceded a significant conversation. The awareness that what he said in the next few hours was going to matter in a way that most of what he said did not. He had said things that mattered before. He was a king. Almost everything he said had consequence. This was different. This was the kind of mattering that lived in the personal rather than the political, in the space that could not be delegated or managed by council or resolved by a superior order from above. He could not command his way through this one. He recognized with something that was not quite humor but came from the same family, slightly in unknown territory. Roe pulled up beside him. He looked at the town below. He looked at Cale. "Ready?" he said. Cale considered the word, no, but that was not the operative question. He had not been not ready for most of the things he had done. He had simply done them. "Yes," he said. They rode down into the valley. The road into Vara's Cross was muddy from recent rain, the horses picking through it carefully, and the town resolved from a distant picture into a specific place with specific sounds and specific smells, bread and horses and the dry smell of cloth from the market stalls, the low noise of people talking price and purpose. No one in the market looked at them twice. They were, to all appearances, a small party of travelers stopping through. Roe leaned close. The grain merchant's shop is on the east side of the market. The room is above it, the window with the dried herbs in the frame. He did not point. He did not need to. Cale looked where Roe was not pointing. East side of the market. A stone building, 2 stories, a wooden sign with a grain symbol, a window on the 2nd floor, and in the window, a row of small bundles hanging in the light. He stopped his horse. He sat for a moment. He was thinking about what to say. He had been thinking about it for 4 days of road and he had not arrived at the right shape of it. He was a man who used language precisely. He chose words the way he chose tactics, with consideration for what they would produce, and he could not find the precise language for what he needed this first moment to say. He thought, start with the truth, the whole truth, plainly spoken. He had not been told how to do this, but he knew it was the correct approach for the same reason he knew most correct approaches, because it was the only one that was stable over time. He dismounted. He handed his reins to one of the 6 men. He told Ro, "Stay here." Ro nodded. He stationed himself and the men near the edge of the market, visible but not present. Professional. Good. Cale walked across the market to the grain merchant's shop. He was aware, as he crossed the distance, that a woman at a cloth stall nearby had stopped folding her cloth and was watching him with the steady, assessing attention of someone who knew exactly what was happening and had been waiting for it. He was aware that the woman's eyes moved from him to the window above the grain merchant's shop and then back to him. He was aware that this woman, whoever she was, had decided to let him proceed. This told him something important. He stopped at the door of the grain merchant's shop. He looked at the window above it. The dried herbs moved very slightly in the air coming through the gap. He raised his hand and knocked. The grain merchant, Gerald, opened the door. He was a square man with a careful manner, and he looked at Cale the way tradespeople looked at well-dressed strangers who knocked at the front door, assessing without being impolite, neither welcoming nor unwelcoming, simply present. "I'm looking for the woman who rents the room upstairs," Cale said. He did not produce a title. He did not produce anything that would require Gerald to decide how to respond to authority. He was, right now, just a man asking a reasonable question. Gerald looked at him for a moment. He looked past him at the horses and the 6 men stationed at the edge of the market. He looked at Cale again. "She's working," Gerald said. "Where?" Another pause. Gerald was, Cale understood, protecting her in the small way available to him, not lying, but not volunteering. "I'll let her know someone is asking," he said. He went inside. Cale heard footsteps going up a staircase, then a pause, then footsteps coming back down. Gerald reappeared. "She says to go up," he said. His tone was neutral, but his eyes had the look of a person who had relayed exactly what was said and was not responsible for what happened next. Cale went inside and up the narrow staircase. There were 2 doors at the top. The one on the left was open. He went in. The room was small and organized with the particular orderliness of someone who had learned to live within limitations and had made something careful and intentional from it. A table, a chair, supplies arranged along the wall in a system he could see the logic of immediately. Herbs drying in the window, a medicine chest, closed. A small personal space, the cot, the cloak on the hook, a book on the shelf. That was clearly secondary to the workspace rather than the main point of the room. She was standing by the table. She was 7 months along and it was visible, and she was not minimizing it, and she was not drawing attention to it, and she was simply there, standing straight, with the same quality of controlled stillness he had recognized in the war tent 7 months ago. Her dark hair was braided back. Her hands were at her sides. She was looking at him with the expression of a woman who had already decided what this conversation was, and was waiting to see if she had decided correctly. He closed the door behind him. He stood in the room. Neither of them spoke immediately. In the silence, he had the exact experience he had been trying to prepare for, and had not been able to prepare for properly, which was the experience of being in the same room as her again, with her looking at him, and the particular quality of that looking hitting him somewhere below the level of thought. 7 months had not changed this. The space in the war tent and the space in this small room were not the same space, but the quality of the air between them was identical. "Celine," he said. Just the name. The way he had said it before. "You found me," she said. Her voice was the same, low and calm, and doing more than the words themselves. "Yes. It took you 6 months. I spent 3 months pretending I wasn't going to," he said. This was the truth, and he had decided the truth was the only acceptable starting point. That was a waste of time. She looked at him. She was reading him, he understood, the way she read everything, clinically and thoroughly, assessing what was in front of her. He held this without deflecting. "Why are you here?" she said. "Because there is a conversation we should have had months ago, and the distance made it impossible." He paused. "And because I know. About the child. I want you to know that I know, and I want you to know that you are not in danger from that knowledge." Her expression did not change, but something in her eyes shifted, something small and tightly controlled and very tired. She had been holding this, he understood. She had been holding all of it, alone, for 7 months, with the thoroughness and the steadiness that was simply who she was. "You're not angry," she said, not a question. She was assessing. "No." "Why not?" He thought about how to answer this with the precision it required. "Because I understand why you made the choices you made. I may not have all the reasons, but I understand the shape of them. And I have no right to anger for decisions you made about your own life with the information you had at the time." She was quiet. "I am not here to claim anything," he said. "I am not here to give orders or to make decisions that are not mine to make. I'm here because I owe you an explanation of who I actually am and what I can actually offer, and you cannot make a real choice about any of this without that information." She looked at him for a long moment. The room was very quiet. Somewhere outside, the market moved on in its ordinary noise. "Sit down," she said finally. She said it the way she said everything, not unfriendly, simply direct. She pulled the chair out from the table and sat down herself, slowly, with the particular deliberateness of someone whose center of gravity had shifted considerably. He found a clear section of the wall and leaned against it. The chair was the only seat in the room, and he was not going to stand over her. "You have questions," he said. "I have a large number of questions," she said. "I've been organizing them for some time." "All right." She looked at him. She asked the first question. It was not the one he had expected. It was specific and practical, and it told him everything about how her mind worked. "If I choose to stay here and raise this child without your involvement, what happens to us both?" He answered it. He answered it honestly and completely, including the parts that were complicated and the parts that were uncertain and the parts that he could control and the parts that he could not. He did not soften anything. She listened the way she always listened, completely, without interrupting. Then she asked the second question. They talked for a very long time. Outside the window, the market wound down through the afternoon, and Clara folded her cloth and went home, and Gerald moved quietly around the ground floor of the shop and did not come upstairs. And the 6 men at the edge of the market waited with the patient immobility of people who had learned that waiting was a significant part of their work. And Rowe leaned against a post with his arms folded and watched the window above the grain merchant's door and thought about various things, none of which he considered particularly his business. The light in the window changed from afternoon to evening. Inside the room, the conversation continued. Both of them were people who used words carefully, which meant neither of them said more than they meant, which meant that what was said was real. That took time. By the time the room had gone properly dark and Celine lit the small lamp on the table, they had covered ground that 7 months of silence had left unwalked. They had said things that could not be unsaid, which was not dangerous but necessary, the way some kinds of medicine were not pleasant but were the only thing that would actually work. He could not say, sitting in the lamplight in that small room above the grain merchant's shop in Vara's Cross, that everything was resolved. Too much remained undecided. Too much depended on what came next. But the conversation had happened. The full weight of the situation had been placed between them rather than carried separately, and that was the thing that had needed doing. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had been holding herself very straight for a very long time. "You should eat," he said. This was not what he had intended to say. It came from a different place, simpler, more direct. She looked at him with the faintest change in her expression that he was learning to read as the closest she came to a smile when she was not ready to fully smile yet. "There's food downstairs," she said. "Then let's go downstairs," he said. And that was, for that evening, what they did. The baby did not wait for convenient circumstances. He arrived on a Thursday night, market day, late, when the town was still half awake with the tail end of the week's business and Cale had been in Vara's Cross for 6 days, and the situation between them was still unresolved in all the ways that mattered, and the sleet had been coming down since midday in that thin, mean, sideways way that made everything colder than the temperature justified. Celine had been fine at noon. She had been fine at 4. She had been fine at 6 in the evening when she finished with her last patient of the day, a farm wife with a shoulder that needed more rest than she was willing to give it. At 7, she understood that she was no longer fine. She did not panic. Panic was a response she had no room for. She was a midwife. She had delivered 43 children in the course of her career, and she knew precisely what was happening, and she knew it was 5 weeks early, and she knew that 5 weeks was better than 8, but was still enough to require attention. And she also knew that understanding a situation completely did not make you immune to the weight of it. She was alone in the room above the grain merchant's shop. Cale had gone to the inn at the other end of the market. They had established this as the arrangement for the week. He was present and available. They were talking through things in the evenings, but they were not yet in the same space in the way that would have started the rumors that he was trying to avoid starting before anything was actually decided. 6 days of careful navigation. She had told him earlier that evening that she was tired and was going to sleep. This had been true at the time. She held onto the edge of the table and breathed through the first real wave of it and took a mental inventory of where everything was. Her tools were in the bag, already organized the way they always were. The supply chest was stocked. She knew Vara's Cross's midwife situation. There was no other midwife. which meant she was managing this herself. She could do this herself. She had delivered a child alone once before, during a flood situation 2 years ago where reaching the mother had taken longer than expected and the child had been very ready. She knew what alone looked like and she knew how to do it. She also knew it was better not to be alone if being alone could be avoided. She opened the window. Below, the market street was mostly empty in the sleet. She could see Gerald's light under the door of the ground floor. "Gerald," she called. He appeared quickly. He was a light sleeper and he had been, she thought, paying more attention to the floor above him than he usually would have for the last 6 days. He came out into the sleet and looked up at her with his practical, unalarmed face. "I need someone to go to the inn and bring the tall man who arrived on Saturday," she said. "Tell him it's time." Gerald asked no questions. He put his hat on and went. She closed the window and went back to the table and held on and breathed. It was 40 minutes before the door opened. She counted them. She was counting other things too. Intervals, durations, the specific language of what her body was telling her, which was detailed and accurate, and happening faster than she had calculated it would for a first delivery. This was not a first delivery. That was relevant. The body remembered. Cale came through the door with the specific quality of movement she had come to recognize in him over 6 days. Not rushed, but completely present. He had his cloak still on. He was wearing the same clothes he had been wearing at dinner. He had come fast. Behind him, filling the doorway, was Ro. She had met Ro 3 days ago, briefly, and had assessed him immediately as someone who was useful and careful, and not inclined to complicate situations. She appreciated this. "Ro," she said, "there is a woman 2 streets west, the house with the red door, named Winnie. She has helped at deliveries before, and she knows what to do. Go get her." Ro was already leaving before she finished the sentence. Cale closed the door and crossed the room. "What do you need?" he said. She told him. Not because she needed him to do it. She was perfectly capable of directing herself, but because having someone to direct kept her thinking rather than reacting, and thinking was what she needed right now. He followed her instructions precisely, and without embellishment. He heated the water. He found the cloths. He moved the lamp to where she said to move it. He did not try to manage the situation. He did not volunteer opinions or reassurances that had not been asked for. He simply did what she asked and stayed close and was quiet. This, she thought, in the fragmentary way her mind was working now, this was a useful quality in a person. Winnie arrived with Ro in 20 minutes. She was a stout, capable woman of 55 who had been at more births than she could count, and who took in the room with a single sweeping look and said, "Right, you, out," to Cale, and then looked at Celine and said, "Tell me where we are." Celine told her. They talked quickly and specifically. The language of 2 people who knew the same work and did not need to explain terminology or waste words. Winnie nodded twice and moved into position. Cale went into the hall. Celine heard the door not close all the way. It took 2 more hours. It was not an easy 2 hours. The position was not ideal and needed correcting, which Winnie did with experienced hands and a calm that Celine matched because it was either that or the alternative, and the alternative was not useful. There was a period in the middle of the 2 hours where Celine understood, with the particular clarity that extreme physical circumstances produced, what she had been refusing to look at directly for 7 months, how genuinely alone she had been in carrying this, not as a criticism, not as regret, simply the fact of it, arriving at the moment when the body was doing the work that the mind could not assist with. She thought of Mara, briefly, sharply, the way you thought of the dead in moments that they would have been good at. Then Winnie said something specific, and Celine responded to it, and the work of the next part began, and there was no longer room for anything except what was happening. The baby arrived. He was small. She had known he would be small, 5 weeks early, her own frame, the particular shape of the pregnancy. But he was here, and he was breathing, and when Winnie placed him in her arms he made a sound like a question, a small rising sound that she felt in her chest, the way she had not felt anything in a long time. She looked at him. He was looking, or trying to look, or doing whatever the version of looking was that very new people did when the world was still an undifferentiated flood of sensation. He had a full head of dark hair. He had the smallest hands she had ever seen on a person who was nonetheless clearly a complete person. "All right," she said quietly. "There you are." She was aware that she was crying. This was not something she had planned. It was, she understood, simply what happened when the thing you had been carrying alone for 8 months arrived into the world and became real. Winnie cleaned and checked and assessed with the efficient thoroughness of her craft. "He's small, but he's strong," she said. "Good set of lungs, everything where it should be." She put her hand briefly on Celine's shoulder, a rare gesture from a practical woman, and then began the work of cleaning up, which she did quietly and efficiently. Celine held her son and looked at him. She thought, he has been a fact inside me for 8 months. He has been the thing I built everything around. He has been the reason I planned carefully, and moved north, and chose this town, and worked this hard, and stayed on my feet past the point where stopping would have been easier. And now he was here, small and dark-haired and breathing. She heard the door. She heard footsteps. Cale had not come back in without being called. He had waited in the hall for 2 hours and she had not called him. He came in now because Winnie had opened the door and stepped into the hall and said something she did not catch, and now he was in the doorway. He looked at her. He looked at the baby. He crossed the room slowly. He stopped a step away from the cot. He looked at the child in her arms with an expression that she had not seen on his face in 6 days of watching it, not the controlled attentiveness, not the careful precision of a man managing what he allowed out, something open, something that had not checked itself before arriving on his face. She held her son out, not as a gesture of anything, not as a concession or an offering, or the beginning of a negotiation, simply as a practical fact. She needed to rest, and Winnie needed to finish, and there was a person here who could hold the baby. He took him, with a carefulness that was almost excessive, the particular overcaution of a large person holding something very small who is extremely aware that they are large and it is very small. His arms adjusted until the child was settled, and then he held still, not moving, not breathing quite normally. He looked at the child. Celine looked at Cale looking at the child. She thought, there it is. She did not say this aloud. She closed her eyes. Winnie finished and said she would check in the morning, and went out with the particular tact of a skilled midwife who understood when the room needed to be left to its occupants. The door closed. It was quiet in the room. The lamp was still burning. The sleet had stopped at some point and she had not noticed when. She could hear Cale breathing. She could hear her son breathing. The small, quick breaths of a very new person who had arrived ahead of schedule and was working hard at the business of existing. She was exhausted in a way that went below physical. It was the specific exhaustion of having finished something that had taken everything. I have not, she said, without opening her eyes, decided anything yet. Cale's voice was quiet. I know. He is mine, she said, first and primarily. Whatever else. Yes, he said. No qualification, no addition. She opened her eyes. He was still looking at the baby. The baby was making the small movements that new babies made, not purposeful, simply the process of existing in a world that was bigger and louder and colder than the one they had come from. What is his name? Cale said. She had been thinking about this for months. She had considered and rejected many names. She had arrived over time at one. Fen, she said. It was a border province name, the kind that appeared in the north and in the old fishing villages on the coast. Simple and old and not attached to anything royal or political. Cale said it once, quietly, the way he said names, testing its weight. It suits him, he said. She looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she looked at Cale and the child he was holding with excessive care and said, sit down before you drop him. He found the edge of the cot and sat. He adjusted his hold, still careful, still slightly rigid. The baby settled into this with the utter unconcern of someone for whom all positions were currently the same degree of new. You're holding him like he might break, she said. He is approximately the size of a bread loaf. He is significantly more durable than a bread loaf. A pause. I'll take your word for that. She was very tired. She was also, underneath the exhaustion and the unresolved situation, and the vast uncertainty of what came next, aware of something she had not expected to feel tonight, which was something in the territory of not alone. Not resolved, not safe in the sense of all danger past, not simple, just not alone. She let her eyes close again. Stay, she said. Not a decision about anything larger, just tonight. Just the practical fact of the night and the tiredness and the baby. He said, all right? She slept. She woke twice in the night. Both times Cale was sitting in the chair by the table, not sleeping but not doing anything visible either, simply present in the room the way he seemed to be present everywhere, completely and without announcing it. The second time she woke, closer to dawn, the baby needed her and she sat up and tended to him and felt Cale's eyes on her in the dark and did not look at him. This was not unfriendliness. It was the same thing it had always been with him, the management of the space between what she felt and what she had decided, which were not yet the same thing. The third time she woke, the room was gray with early light, and Cale was asleep in the chair with his head against the wall, and his arms folded, and the particular quality of a large person asleep in a small chair. Not comfortable, but committed to the position. Gerald must have been quiet coming up the stairs, or Cale had not slept long. She looked at him for a moment. She permitted herself this. Then she looked at Fen, who was asleep in the bundled cloth beside her, with his small face arranged in the expression of absolute non-concern that new babies wore when they were not immediately needing anything, and she thought, there he is. There is the fact I have been arranging everything around. She had thought, in the long months of the pregnancy, that when he arrived she would feel the full weight of the situation, the fear, the uncertainty, the specific aloneness of it, arrive with him. The way things that you have been managing finally land when the thing you were managing them for becomes real. Instead, she felt something quieter, not relief exactly, something more like recognition. She was a mother. She had been preparing to be one for 8 months, but now she was one, which was a different thing, and the difference was not what she had expected. It was simpler, more immediate. He was here and she was here, and the world could be whatever it was going to be. Cale woke an hour later, in the way she had come to notice that he always woke. Completely and all at once, no gradual surfacing, simply the transition from not there to fully present. He looked at her first, then at the baby, then at the window, assessing the light. He stood. He did not stretch or make the small adjustments that most people made. He said, "How do you feel?" "Tired," she said. "All right?" He nodded. He looked at the baby. Something moved briefly across his face and then went back to where it lived. "I need to go to the inn," he said. "Ro will have news." She understood. He was not leaving. He was accounting for the fact that he was a king, with an ongoing situation, and that situation had not stopped because he had spent the night in a chair in Vara's Cross. "Go," she said. He went to the door. He stopped. He turned back. "Celine." She looked at him. "I want to be clear about something," he said. He chose the words with the precision she had come to recognize as his. Not careful in the sense of soft, but careful in the sense of accurate. "I am not going to manage this from a distance. That is not something I'm capable of." He paused. "I'm not telling you this to pressure you. I'm telling you because you should know it as a fact when you are deciding what you want." She looked at him. "I know you are capable of doing this alone," he said. "I know that is not the question. The question is whether you want to." She said nothing for a moment. Then, "That is going to take me more than one night to answer." "I know," he said. "I'll be back this afternoon." He went. She heard his footsteps on the stairs, and Gerald's door, and then nothing. She sat in the quiet room in the growing morning light with her son asleep beside her, and looked at the wall, and thought about everything that had led to this room. The war tent, the cold morning, the 6 months of North Road and herb drying and market days, and Clara's bread and the very long conversation in this room 6 days ago, that had said what needed to be said, and left the rest open. She thought about the question he had put in front of her. Not the large abstract question, what will happen, what does this mean, what comes next, but the specific personal one, whether she wanted to. She had been a person who did things alone for a long time. It was not something she had chosen exactly. It was something that had become her shape. Mara's house had trained healers to be self-sufficient. The years had confirmed that self-sufficiency was reliable, in a way that dependence was not. She had not been wrong about this. But there were 2 different kinds of alone. There was alone because you have chosen it, which was one thing, and alone because you have not been offered a real alternative, which was another. He was, whatever else he was, a real alternative. She picked up Fen carefully and held him against her, and felt his small, heavy weight, and his warm presence, and she said, very quietly, into the top of his dark hair, "What do you think?" He did not say anything. He was 4 hours old. She took this as a neutral position and reserved the right to make her own decision. Winnie came at mid-morning, as promised. She checked everything that needed checking and said Fen was doing well for an early baby and would need watching for the first 2 weeks, but was not in danger. She gave Celine specific instructions and said the same things she would have said to any mother, firmly and without embellishment, and then she sat down and accepted the cup of tea Gerald had sent up and looked at Celine with the straightforward assessment of a practical woman. "The man from the inn," Winnie said. "He was here all night." "He was. Clara mentioned he has been here 6 days and is not a traitor." "No," Celine said. Winnie looked at her. "Is he trouble?" Celine thought about this. "Not in the way you mean," she said. Winnie drank her tea. She did not ask more questions. This was something Celine had appreciated about Vara's Cross since she arrived. The town's appetite for other people's business was practical rather than invasive. People wanted to know what affected them. They were less interested in what did not. The town will talk, Winnie said eventually. I know. You are prepared for that. I have been prepared for it for 8 months, Celine said. I just did not know exactly what form it would take. Winnie finished her tea and said she would come back tomorrow, and went out with the quiet efficiency she brought to everything. Celine sat with Fen in the morning light and listened to the market starting below and heard the familiar sound of it, the calls and the haggling and the low background noise of people going about their ordinary purposes, and thought about how much she had come to rely on this sound, this specific market, in this specific town. Clara appeared at the window. She did not knock. She simply appeared, looking up from the street below with a face that was attempting to be professionally neutral and not entirely succeeding. Celine opened the window. How is he? Clara called up. He is here, and he is breathing, and he has a full head of hair, Celine said. Clara's face did what it rarely did, which was break open into a smile with no management or restraint in it. It transformed her completely. She was, in that moment, simply happy, in the specific, uncomplicated way that people who are genuinely invested in other people's well-being were happy when good things happened. Good, Clara said. She held up a basket, bread, and the soup from the kitchen at the inn, which your man arranged this morning before I was even at my stall. Apparently he knows how to ask for what is needed. Your man. 2 words that required Celine to make a decision about whether to correct them, and she found she could not, immediately, locate the energy. Thank you, she said, for the bread. For all of it. Clara looked at her for a moment. You're going to be all right, she said. Not a question. Yes, Celine said. I am. She meant it. She was not certain yet what all right looked like from the outside, what shape it would take, what she would decide in the days and weeks ahead. But she was certain about the core of it. She was still here. She had done what she set out to do. Fen was here, and he was healthy, and she was the person who had brought him safely to this morning. The rest was still being written. That was fine. She was good at beginnings. The council letter arrived on the morning of the 9th day. Roe brought it to the inn and then brought it to Celine's room, which was where Cale had been spending most of his hours, and he set it on the table with the particular careful flatness of a man setting down something he knows is going to change the atmosphere of a room. Cale read it standing. His face did not change. He folded it once when he was finished and set it next to where it had been. Celine had been nursing Fen in the chair by the window. She watched Cale's face and read what his face was doing. Which was not much, which was, in itself, information. A man who showed nothing was a man who was managing something. Tell me, she said. He told her. 3 members of the council had made a formal representation about the king's absence. This was within their rights, and was not a crisis. The crisis was adjacent to it. Word had reached the capital, through what channel he could not yet determine, that the king had ridden north, and had found a woman and a child, and 3 rival noble houses had made representations about this within 48 hours of the information arriving. 2 of the representations were procedural. One was not. The one that was not had suggested, in the language that political documents used when they wanted to say dangerous things without saying them directly, that an unrecognized heir created instability, and that instability left unresolved had historically produced situations that were not good for anyone. Historically produced situations, Celine said. Yes. That is careful language for something specific. Yes, he said, it is. She looked at Fen. He was asleep now, his small face arranging and rearranging itself in the way of new babies who were processing the experience of existing. She had been watching this for 9 days, and it had not stopped being remarkable. When do you need to go back? She said. I should have gone back 3 days ago, he said. Without this, I would have stayed another week. She was quiet. He crossed the room and crouched in front of the chair so that he was at her level rather than standing above her, which was something he had started doing in their conversations, and which she had noted but not commented on. I am going to be honest with you about what is happening, he said. The letter is a warning. The situation is manageable, but only from the capital. I cannot manage it from here. I know, she said. And I need to know what you want before I go, he said. Not in general. Specifically. I need to know if I am going back to manage a political situation around a family, or if I am managing a political situation about a child whose mother does not want to be involved. She looked at him. He was using the same precision he always used. Not cold, but accurate. He was not trying to pressure her. He was telling her that her answer had operational implications and he needed to plan around it. This was, she thought, actually a form of respect. I need conditions, she said. Tell me. She had been thinking about this for 9 days. She had been building the list from the morning after Fen arrived, in the quiet hours when the baby slept and she had nothing to do but think. She had organized it with the same methodical care she brought to a medicine chest. Fen is my son, she said. His decisions about who he is and what he becomes are mine to make, until he is old enough to make them himself. They are not made by counsel or by political necessity. Agreed, Kale said, without hesitation. If I come to the capital, I practice my work. I am not a court decoration. I do not give up what I do. Agreed. If at any point I determine that the situation is not safe for him or for me, if the political situation becomes something that puts us at risk, I have the right to leave and you do not use your resources to prevent that. He was quiet for a moment. This was the hardest one and they both knew it. I will not prevent you leaving, he said. I ask only that if you are planning to leave, you tell me first rather than disappearing. She looked at him. You have my word, he said. She looked at him steadily. She was assessing this the way she assessed everything, not the words but the person saying them. She had 9 days of data. She had the entire evening of their long conversation 6 days ago. She had his face when he looked at Fen. She had the fact that he had found her, in a market town 4 days' ride from the capital, and come without announcement and without a declaration, and had spent 6 days asking questions without demanding answers. One more, she said. He waited. Clara, she said. If I go, she comes with me, not as a servant, as whatever she agrees to be. She is a person who has been a friend to me here, and I will not leave her behind like I left everyone else. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, but something warmer than what was usually there. Yes, he said. Celine looked at the window. She looked at the market below. Clara was at her stall, visible from where she sat, folding cloth with the same steady attention she brought to everything. You need to leave tomorrow, she said. It was not a question. Yes. Then go tomorrow, handle the council. Give me 2 weeks to arrange things here and say proper goodbyes. She paused. And send something ahead. Make sure there is a room I choose, not one that is chosen for me. With good light and room for a medicine chest. He looked at her. You're coming, he said. The same tone as always. Not a celebration, just an accurate observation of fact. I am coming, she said. I have not decided everything else. I am coming and I will decide the rest as information arrives and I see what the situation actually is, rather than what I imagine it to be. That is fair, he said. It is realistic, she said. Fair is something I will determine later. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at Fen, who had shifted slightly in his sleep, and made the small sound he made when he was about to wake. You should know, Kale said, that I am going to continue asking to be involved. That is not going to stop, because we have not resolved the larger questions. I want to be clear about that. I know, she said. And you should know, he said, that I understand the work I have to do to deserve this. I am not expecting you to simply arrive. She looked at him. Good, she said, because I was not planning to. He stood. He went to the door. He stopped once, the way he always stopped once, and turned back. She had already looked back down at Fen. Celine, he said. I know, she said. She did not look up. He went. She held Fen and listened to the footsteps going down the stairs and heard the door of the building open and close, and then she heard the market outside, and Clara's voice calling a price, and the wagon coming through the far end of the street, and the ordinary sound of Vara's cross doing what it always did. She breathed. 2 weeks. She had 2 weeks to close this chapter and open the next one. She had closed chapters before. She was good at it. She was less good at opening the next one with any kind of peace, but she was working on this. She looked at Fen. We are going to the capital, she said quietly. He opened his eyes, or tried to, the way he tried things, with the effort of someone for whom everything was still extremely new. He made the questioning sound. I know, she said. It was not the plan. The plan has changed. She thought about Mara, briefly, intensely, the way she had been thinking about her since Fen arrived. Not grief, exactly, because Mara was still alive, but the particular sharp missing of someone who should be here for this, and was not. She would write to Mara, today, a letter that was overdue. She shifted Fen to her other arm and reached for the pen and paper she kept on the table within reach, and she began. She was not entirely sure what she was going to say. She started with the thing she knew for certain. Mara, he arrived last Thursday. He is healthy. His name is Fen. He has your stubbornness about being held in the wrong position, and I cannot imagine where he got it. She stopped. She thought about the next thing. She wrote, I am leaving Vara's Cross in 2 weeks. I am going south. I will explain this in a longer letter or in person, which I hope will be soon. She looked at this for a moment. Then she wrote, I am not afraid. I want you to know that. I have not made a final decision about everything, but I am going with open eyes, and that is what you always taught me to do. She signed it. She folded it. She put it in the envelope and wrote Mara's Abbas on the front. She would give it to Gerald to post when she went downstairs. Outside, the market turned through its morning. Clara folded cloth. The vegetable vendor called his prices. The dogs slept. Vara's Cross continued to be exactly what it was, a market town at a road intersection, unremarkable and reliable, and full of the ordinary sustaining business of life. She had been grateful for every day of it. She was grateful for it now, in a different way, the way you were grateful for a place when you were about to leave it, when it had already shifted from present to memory while you were still standing inside it. She would come back. She believed this. She was not the kind of person who did not come back to places that had been good to her. But for now, there was a future she had chosen with open eyes, and a child in her arms, and a letter on the table for the woman who had taught her how to think. She stood up. She put Fen and the bundled cloth on the cot. She washed her hands and her face and straightened her braid and picked up the letter. She went downstairs. Gerald was in the shop weighing grain when she came down. He was a man who had spent his entire life being useful without requiring acknowledgement for it, and he looked at her the same way he always looked at her, directly, briefly, with the particular low-temperature warmth of someone who did not make large gestures but meant the small ones. She handed him the letter. She told him who it was going to. He said he would see that it went out in the Morning Post. Then he looked at the letter in his hand and looked at her and said, You're leaving. It was not a question. He was the kind of person who knew what was happening in his own building. In 2 weeks, she said, I will pay the remaining rent. He shook his head once. Don't worry about the rent. She looked at him. You kept the building standing, he said. My cough is gone. My knee is better. He said this in the way he said everything, straight, without decoration. I don't need the rent. She did not argue with him. Some gestures were not made to be declined. Thank you, she said. For the room. For the stairs you never creaked on. For getting Gerald on the night it mattered. He looked slightly uncomfortable at this, in the way of a man who had done what was right, and found gratitude for it slightly excess. That's nothing, he said. It was not nothing, she said. He went back to his weighing. She went out into the market. It was mid-morning and the market was at its full energy, the stalls busy and the lanes full of people going in the usual overlapping directions that markets produced. She walked through it with Fen against her chest in the sling she had made from Kale's riding cloak the week before. A practical use she had not mentioned to him, and she looked at everything with the deliberate attention of someone memorizing a place. The baker who always oversalted things, the herb vendor who smelled of his own stock, the family of 5 who came every market day, and the children always escaped in different directions, the dog that lay at the entrance to the leather stall and regarded all passers-by with professional indifference. She knew this market now. She had learned it in the specific way you learned a place when you lived in it and worked in it and walked through it regularly, not memorized, just known, in the body rather than the mind. Clara was at her stall. She was talking to a customer about something in a bolt of heavy blue cloth, turning the edge of the fabric to show the weave in the light. She finished the conversation, made the sale, and looked up to find Celine standing in front of the stall. She looked at Celine's face. She looked at Fen in the sling. She looked at the market around them. When? She said. 2 weeks, Celine said. I need to ask you something. Clara waited. I am going south, Celine said, to the capital. The situation is complicated in ways I will explain properly later, but the short version is that I am not going under duress, and I am not going without choices, and I have negotiated the terms. She paused. I asked if you could come with me, if you wanted to. Clara was very still for a moment. Not as a servant, Celine said. You would not be working for anyone but yourself. I do not want to leave without knowing you are somewhere I can find you. Clara looked at the market around them. She had been in Vara's Cross for 12 years. She had built her stall and her business from nothing, here, in this specific market, at this specific road intersection. Celine knew this. She was not asking a small thing. Clara looked back at her. I have been thinking, Clara said. That blue cloth sells for 3 times as much in the southern provinces as it does up here. She said this with the casual precision of a businesswoman who had been keeping track of this information for reasons that were now becoming relevant. I imagine it does, Celine said. And the spring market in the capital is supposed to be twice the size of anything up here. Probably more than twice. Clara folded the bolt of blue cloth with the neat efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times. She put it on the pile with the others. "I'll need 3 weeks, not 2, she said. "I have inventory to move." Celine looked at her. "Do not look at me like that," Clara said. "I am a practical woman. I will come because I want to come, and because the business opportunity is excellent, and because you are the most interesting person I have met in 12 years of living here." Celine said nothing for a moment, then, "Thank you. Do not thank me yet. I have a great deal to pack and you are going to help me." Celine looked at Fen, who was asleep against her chest with the same absolute non-concern he brought to all situations. "I am currently operating one-handed, and I have a newborn," she said. "Then I will give you the light boxes," Clara said. "The heavy ones can wait for someone with 2 free hands." She reached under the table and produced, from what seemed like a permanent supply, a bread roll. She handed it to Celine. "Eat. You are going to need the energy." Celine took the bread. She stood in the market and ate it, and watched Clara resume her business with the ease of someone who had made a large decision, and put it behind her without drama and was already moving forward. She thought, this is what a good person looks like. Decided, and practical, and already on to the next thing. She finished the bread. She shifted Fen in the sling. She had 2 weeks. She had a letter going to Mara. She had conditions that had been agreed to. She had Clara, who would come in 3 weeks with her blue cloth and her practical assessment of the southern market and the particular reliable presence that Celine had come to think of as one of the better things she had built here. She had a son who was 11 days old and already inconveniently good at sleeping through market noise. She had, she thought, looking at the market around her, and the road beyond it, and the wide country of this kingdom stretching away in all directions, a life. It was not the life she had planned. It was considerably more complicated than anything she had planned. But she was a healer, and healers did not work with ideal conditions. Healers worked with what was in front of them, and they made it work, and they kept things alive. She was going to be fine. She turned toward the grain merchant's shop and her room above it, where she needed to start the work of 2 weeks' worth of endings and beginnings. She walked through the market with her son against her chest and her steady healer's stride, and her head up, and no one who watched her pass would have had any reason to think she was anything other than exactly what she appeared to be, a woman who knew where she was going. She did, in fact, know where she was going. What she did not know, and what she was, for the first time in a long time, willing not to know in advance, was exactly what it would look like when she arrived. That was all right. She had arrived in places before without knowing what they would look like. She had been fine. She would be fine again. The capital was louder than she had expected, and older, and more layered than any description had prepared her for. She had been in cities before. She had traveled through 3 of the kingdom's larger market towns on her way north the previous autumn, and she had lived in a moderate-sized town for 2 years before Vara's Cross. She understood cities. She knew how to read them, the way the quality of noise changed by neighborhood and time of day, the way different kinds of buildings meant different kinds of people, and different kinds of need. The capital was a different scale. It was not the size that struck her first. It was the layers, the way the oldest parts of the city sat underneath the newer parts, buildings constructed on top of the foundations of buildings that had stood for 200 years, the streets worn into their current shapes by more feet than she could imagine, the whole thing pressed into itself with the density of something that had been growing for longer than anyone currently alive could personally remember. She arrived with Ro and 4 of the 6 men, which was the arrangement Kale had sent back with. He was not going to meet her at the city gate. This was deliberate, and she had approved of it. The entry would be handled practically, as an arrival, not as a presentation. She was not ready to be presented. Ro was as useful as he had been in Vara's Cross. He showed her the route they would take through the city and explained what each part of it was. He pointed out the market district, the healer's quarter, the locations of the main roads that connected everything. He did this not with the enthusiasm of someone who expected her to be impressed, but with the practical thoroughness of someone who understood that information was useful. She asked questions. He answered them without simplifying. The palace occupied the high eastern quarter of the city, which was historically where cities put their centers of power. High ground, good sight lines, defensible. She had seen it from the road on the way in, a mass of stone above the city's roofline that announced itself without trying to be beautiful about it. It was old and serious, and it looked like what it was. She looked at it, and did not let herself think too many things about it at once. Ro brought her in through a gate she had not expected. Not the main gate, not the processional entrance, but a working gate on the east side that opened directly to a wing of the palace she later came to think of as the actual palace. The part where things happened rather than the part where things were displayed. He showed her to the room. She stood in the doorway. The room was on the second floor of the east wing. It had 2 windows, both tall, both south-facing, which meant good light through most of the day. It was not a grand room. It had high ceilings, the way old buildings did, and the stone walls were real stone rather than plaster, and the floor was worn in the places where feet had traveled for decades. It was clean and it was cool and it was, she understood, the room that had been chosen by the person she had asked to choose it, based on her specifications. Good light, room for a medicine chest. There was a medicine chest against the far wall, already there, empty. It was the right size and the right construction, and it had 12 separate compartments with closable doors. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she put her bag down on the bed and went to the window and looked out at the view, the city below the Palace Hill, the river that ran through its eastern district, the hills beyond it going pale blue with distance. Fen, in his sling, made the small questioning sound. "I know," she said. "Give me a moment." She stood at the window for the moment. She gave herself the full length of it, the adjustment, the disorientation, the specific feeling of being in a place that was enormously different from the place she had been 2 weeks ago. She had learned not to rush past adjustment. Adjustment that you skipped came back later at a worse time. Then she turned around and began unpacking. She had been in the room for 3 hours, unpacked, supplies organized in the medicine chest in the order she always used, the cot for Fen set up near the window where the light was good, when there was a knock at the door. She expected Ro. She expected a palace servant. She expected, vaguely, some kind of formal notification. She did not expect Clara. She opened the door and Clara was there, slightly travel-worn, with 2 large packs on the floor beside her, and the specific expression of a woman who had arrived ahead of schedule through superior organization. "I said 3 weeks," Clara said. "I managed it in 2. Celine stared at her. "How?" "I am a very good businesswoman," Clara said. She picked up both packs, one in each hand, and looked past Celine into the room. "This is good. The windows are south-facing. I will need to know if there is a market district with a fabric quarter." "There is an entire healer's quarter and I assume a fabric district larger than Varas Cross's entire market," Celine said. "Excellent." Clara set the packs down and looked at Fen in his sling. "He looks bigger. He is 3 weeks old." "They do that." Clara produced, from somewhere in the depths of one of her packs, a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. She handed it to Celine. "How are you managing?" Celine looked at the bread. She looked at Clara. She felt something release that she had not known was held tight, something in the place where the specific loneliness of the last 2 weeks of closing up the Varas Cross room had been sitting without her acknowledging it. "Better now," she said, and she meant it. Clara nodded. "Show me where I am sleeping, and then show me the rest of this place. I want to understand the layout." Celine showed her. Over the following 3 days, while Kale was in a continuous series of council sessions that she heard about from Ro rather than from him directly, she learned the East Wing and then the parts of the palace that were practical to know. The kitchens, the herb stores, the working library, the room the palace's existing physician used that she would need to navigate carefully. The physician was a man named Aldous who was in his 60s and had been in his role for 20 years, and who looked at Celine with the particular expression of a man who had been told to expect a colleague and had mentally prepared for the wrong person. She was used to this. She introduced herself directly and clearly. She did not understate her training. She did not overstate her intentions. She said she was a Mara's house healer and she would be practicing from the East Wing and she hoped their work would not conflict. Aldous looked at her for a moment. He said, "Mara's house." He said it the way people said it when the words carried weight. "Yes," she said. "You have her method?" "I studied under her directly for 6 years." He looked at her differently after that. Not warmly, exactly, but with the specific shift in assessment that happened when someone recalibrated you upward. "The East Wing is historically the family's personal physician wing," he said. "I work from the medical block on the north side. I imagine we will have occasion to confer." "I imagine we will," she said. They did not shake hands. Neither of them were handshaking people. But something had been established that was not territory marking, and was not a full alliance, and was the correct thing for 2 competent practitioners to have between them. She went back to the East Wing. In the evenings of those 3 days, Kale came when the council business released him. He knocked. He came in when she answered. He sat in the chair by the table, which had become the arrangement in Varas Cross, and had carried over without discussion. He asked about her day. She told him the real things, not the manageable version. He listened with his full attention. On the third evening he told her about the council meetings, not in a filtered way, in the full way, including the parts that were complicated, and the parts that were ongoing, and the parts that depended on decisions she had not made yet. She was thinking about his word, yet, for a while after he said it. On the fourth evening he brought a document. It was not sealed with the royal mark. It was handwritten, which she thought about. He had written it himself. He put it on the table without explanation and waited. She read it. It was 2 pages. It was the conditions she had spoken in the room above the grain merchant's shop, written out formally and signed at the bottom. She looked at the signature. She looked at him. "This is a formal document," she said. "It is. You wrote it yourself." "I had help with the legal language," he said. "The substance is mine." She looked back at the document. She read the section about Fen. She read the section about her work. She read the section about the right to leave. The right to leave was written the way she had said it, clearly and without exception, with the added clause he had offered in Vara's cross about being told first, which was reasonable, and she had already decided she would honor. "You did not add anything," she said. "No." She looked at him. He was sitting across the table from her, in the chair, with the stillness that was natural to him, and that she had come to associate specifically with moments when he was choosing carefully. He was not leaning forward. He was not pressing anything. He was simply there, waiting for whatever she decided. She thought about 8 months of carrying this alone. She thought about Mara's hands around hers by the fire. She thought about the road north in autumn and the market mornings in Vara's cross and Clara's bread and Gerald's quiet presence and the night Fen arrived and the specific sound of Cale's footsteps in the hall for 2 hours while he waited to be called. She thought about what it meant to give your word to a person and have them read your word in your face as clearly as in the document. She picked up the pen. She signed it. She put the pen down. She slid the document back across the table. He looked at her name next to his on the page. Something moved through his face, not relief, because relief implied he had been afraid, and she did not think he had been afraid. Not exactly. Something that was the end of a long wait and the beginning of something else. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. Neither of them said anything else for a moment. Outside the East Wing windows, the capital city was moving through its evening, the last of the market stalls closing, the inn lights coming up, the particular change in noise level that happened when the working day ended and the city shifted into its other register. She looked at Fen asleep on the cot. She looked at the medicine chest. She looked at the 2 south-facing windows and the view they would give her every morning for however long she was here. She was not sure yet how long that was. She was not going to pretend to know. But she was here. She had chosen this. She had signed her name next to his. That was not the end of anything. That was, she understood, where things actually started. The first council challenge came on the 6th day. She had been warned it would come. Roe had mentioned it, in the careful indirect way he mentioned things that were incoming, on the 3rd day. Aldous had mentioned it in more direct terms on the 4th day, which told her he was paying attention. Cale had told her himself on the 5th evening, fully and without softening. 3 noble houses had put in formal representations about her presence in the palace. The representations were not openly hostile. They were written in the careful language of political maneuvering, which was to say they asked formal questions and made procedural observations rather than stating anything directly dangerous. But the question underneath all 3 was the same. Who was she and what did she represent? She had thought about how to answer this. On the 6th morning, the council's senior secretary appeared at her door with a formal invitation to appear before the full council at midday. The invitation was politely worded. The timing was not a coincidence. Midday was when the council held its open sessions, the ones that were, in theory, accessible to any member of the court. She was a member of the court. She had signed a document. She accepted the invitation. She wore what she wore for important work, her good dark dress, the one that was both practical and carried itself well. She braided her hair back the way she always did it when she needed her hands free. She carried nothing with her except her own clarity, which she had been organizing since the previous evening. Clara, who had been in the East Wing every day since arriving 2 days after Celine, and who had managed to locate both the fabric district and 3 separate cloth merchants before Celine had finished unpacking, looked at her before she left and said, "You know what you're doing." "I know what I am," Celine said. "That is enough." Clara nodded. "Don't let them make it complicated," she said. "They will try. Keep it simple." Celine went. The council chamber was large and formal and old, and it seated 12 members with the senior secretary at one end. When she walked in, all 12 were present, which was itself an answer to the question of whether this mattered. All 12 being present meant it was considered significant. Cale was at the head of the table. He did not look at her differently from how he looked at anyone else in the room, which was to say he looked at her with his full attention. This was the correct thing and she appreciated it. She stood at the end of the table. The senior member, an older man named Lord Edworth, who had been on the council for 17 years by the look of him, and who had the face of a man who had outlasted many situations, and intended to outlast this one too, addressed her with the formal courtesy of a person who was going to be polite for as long as the situation allowed him to be polite. He asked her about her lineage. She told him, plainly and completely. Mara's house training, Western Province origin, her mother's name, her father's work. She did not have a noble lineage. She did not claim one. She stood in front of 12 council members and told them exactly what she was and exactly what she had trained to be, and she did not apologize for either. There was a pause after she finished. Lord Edworth asked about the child. She told him. The child was born. He was healthy. He was her son. Edworth asked, in the careful political language she had been prepared for, about the child's status in terms of the succession. She looked at the council and said, Fen is 4 weeks old. His status in any succession is a question for when he is old enough to be asked about it, and that conversation will be between his parents and eventually himself. It is not a question for this room at this time. Silence. She was aware that she had just said something that was not how these things were usually said in this room. She was also aware that Cale, at the head of the table, had made a very small movement, barely visible, the compression of something that would have been satisfaction in a man who allowed himself to show it. Lord Edworth looked at her for a long moment. He was a man who had measured a great many people across this table, and he was measuring her now, in the way of someone taking a proper reading rather than a superficial one. He asked one more question. He asked what her intentions were regarding the king. She had considered this one carefully. She answered it directly. My intentions are to practice my work, to raise my son, and to determine through direct experience rather than assumption what kind of relationship is possible with the king. I have no other intentions. I do not require a title. I do not require political standing. I require what I was given. A room with good light and the right to practice my work. She paused. What the king requires is a different conversation, she said. You should have it with him. She saw Cale look at her then, not with the careful neutral quality of the formal setting, with something else, briefly, before it closed again. The session ended 20 minutes later. Nothing was resolved. Nothing in these rooms resolved in a single session, she understood that. But the representation had been made, and the questions had been asked, and she had answered them on her own terms, which was the part that mattered most. She walked out of the council chamber, and back through the long corridor of the formal wing, and into the east wing, where the ceiling was lower, and the floors were older, and the rooms smelled of dried herbs. She closed the door of her room. She sat down. Fen was asleep in his cot. Clara's packs were against the wall. The medicine chest sat with its 12 compartments organized exactly as she had organized them. She put her hands flat on the table, the way Cale had put his hands flat on his table in the palace the day he decided to send for Ro, which she knew about because he had told her, because that was the kind of conversation they were having now, the real ones. She breathed. She had done that. She had walked into a council chamber and said what she was and held the room while they assessed it. She was, she thought, going to be all right here. It was not going to be simple. It was not going to be the quiet, ordinary life she had built in Vara's Cross. It was going to be complicated and politically adjacent and full of moments like the one she had just navigated, where being herself was a deliberate act rather than a given. But she was good at deliberate acts. She had been practicing them her whole life. There was a knock at the door. She opened it. Cale. He looked at her for a moment. How do you feel? He said. Steady, she said. He nodded once. Then, Edworth asked me afterward what you are. She looked at him. What did you say? I told him the truth, he said. I said I was still finding out. She looked at him. He looked back at her, with the complete attention that was his natural setting, and that she was still, even after weeks, adjusting to being on the receiving end of without deflecting. That's an honest answer, she said. It's the only answer I have, he said. She opened the door wider. Then come in, she said. We can keep finding out. He came in. The door closed. Outside the East Wing, the council was continuing its session, and Lord Edworth was making his notes, and the city was moving through its afternoon, and the kitchen was starting the evening preparations, and the whole enormous layered machinery of the palace, and the capital, and the kingdom kept running, as it always did, regardless. Inside the room, two people were having a conversation that was honest and long, and had no clear endpoint, which was, for both of them, something they were still learning to be comfortable with. They were getting better at it. Mara arrived on a Tuesday in the 4th week. She was not supposed to arrive. She had not been invited. She had, as far as Celine knew, never left the western provinces in the 23 years she had been running her house there. She was 73 years old and had a bad left knee, and had told Celine on multiple occasions that she had no interest in travel, because there was sufficient work wherever she was without going to find more. She arrived in a cart. She had hired it from a trader going south, and she sat in the back with 2 bags and the particular upright posture of a person who would not, under any circumstances, admit that the journey had been uncomfortable, regardless of what the journey had been. The palace gate guard, who had been briefed on expected visitors and had no record of this one, found himself in the situation of explaining to a 73-year-old woman in the back of a produce cart that she would need authorization to enter. Mara looked at him with the gray eyes that had looked at difficult situations for 5 decades and said, "The woman in the east wing. Celine, tell her Mara is at the gate." The guard sent a runner. Celine came to the gate herself, rather than sending an attendant, because this was Mara, and sending an attendant would have been wrong in a way she could not entirely articulate. She found her still in the back of the cart, which had been pulled aside to let other traffic through, and she looked at her, and felt the specific feeling of someone who has been managing alone for a long time, looking at the person who taught them how to manage alone. "You were not supposed to come," Celine said. "I am aware," Mara said. She stood, which required a moment, because of the knee. The driver helped her down with the resigned efficiency of a man who had been helping her in and out of his cart for 4 days, and had made peace with this. "Your letter said you were well. I wanted to see what well looked like." "I am actually well," Celine said. "I will assess that myself." Mara picked up her bags. She looked at the palace behind Celine. She looked at it the way she looked at most things, straight, for an appropriate duration, and then she had decided. "This is large," she said. "Yes. Lead the way." Celine led the way. They went through the gate and up through the working part of the palace grounds to the east wing, and Mara looked at everything they passed with the same clinical attention she brought to patients, the same assessment of what was in front of her and what it meant, and what, if anything, needed addressing. She asked 4 questions on the way. All 4 questions were practical. When they reached the room, the first thing Mara saw was Fen. He was awake in his cot, working at something with his hands in the manner of babies who had recently discovered that they had hands and were not yet sure what to do about this, but found the situation compelling. He was 6 weeks old, and considerably larger than he had been at birth, though still smaller than most 6-week-old babies would have been. Mara set her bags down. She went to the cot. She looked at him with the thoroughness of a trained healer, checking what needed checking, noting what needed noting. Then she put out one finger and Fen, who had no particular plan, grabbed it with the completeness that babies brought to the acquisition of things. Mara looked at him holding her finger. Something happened on her face that was not the controlled assessment expression. Something older and less managed. "He has your grip," she said. "He has your stubbornness," Celine said. Mara looked at her. "I taught you to call that tenacity." "You did. I am distinguishing." Mara sat down in the chair. Celine's chair. The one by the table. The one that had become the chair in these rooms the way everything had settled into its place. She still had Fen's grip on her finger and she was not, apparently, moving to change this. "Tell me everything," Mara said. So Celine told her everything. The real version, the one she had not been able to put in any letter. From the night in the tent to the morning after. From the months in Vara's Cross to the night Fen arrived. From the conversation in the room above Gerald's shop to the council chamber and the document and all the evenings since. She told it in order and completely, and without managing which parts to minimize because this was Mara, and Mara had always been able to read a minimized account and ask exactly the question that exposed what had been left out. Mara listened. She asked 3 questions during the telling, all of them specific and targeted. At the end she was quiet for a while. Then she said, "You are doing well." Celine looked at her. "You sound surprised." "I am not surprised," Mara said. "I trained you. I know what you are capable of. I am simply noting that the situation has been complicated and you have handled it without breaking, and that is worth saying." Celine looked at the window. "I was afraid," she said, "through most of it. I want you to know that. It was not confidence." "Fear and capability are not opposites," Mara said. She had said this before, more than once, across the years of the training. It had a specific resonance each time it was said in a different situation. You were afraid, and you thought clearly, and you acted with good judgment. That is exactly what I asked of you. Celine looked at her hands. I could have handled it differently, she said. Yes, Mara said, without cushioning. You could have contacted him sooner. You could have not run. Those are true. She looked at Celine. You could also have made choices that resulted in worse outcomes for you and for Fen. You did not. The choices you made were the choices of someone who was protecting what needed protecting with the information they had. That is what I trained you to do. Fen had fallen asleep. He had fallen asleep while gripping Mara's finger, and had not let go even in sleep, which Mara was apparently going to allow indefinitely. What do you think of him? Celine said. She meant Kale, and Mara knew she meant Kale. Mara was quiet for a moment. I have not met him, she said. I will form an opinion when I have. You will meet him tonight, Celine said. He comes in the evenings. I will see, Mara said, and I will tell you what I see. This was exactly what Celine had wanted her for, without fully knowing she had wanted her for it until this moment. The 6 weeks of evenings with Kale, the conversations, the slow and careful building of something she still did not have a name for. She had been navigating it alone, and the specific thing she had been missing was the kind of person who could see both her and the situation from the outside, with complete honesty, and no investment in a particular outcome. Mara was the only person she trusted to do that. He is different from what I expected, Celine said. Most people are, Mara said. I mean, significantly different. He is. She stopped. She looked for the right words. He does not use his authority with me. He asks. He waits. When I tell him something is not decided yet, he accepts it without pushing. Mara looked at her. And this is what you did not expect. I expected him to be the Alpha King, Celine said. He is. But not in this room. What is he in this room? Celine thought about this for a moment. Careful, she said. He is careful. With me. With Fen. She paused. He held Fen for an hour yesterday without being asked to, and he did it without speaking, just walking around the room slowly, and Fen went to sleep. Gerald had to carry grain bags for 3 months to achieve that. I have been trying chamomile drops. Mara looked at her with the expression that meant she was filing something specific away. And what do you feel, she said, when you watch him do this? Celine was quiet. Celine, Mara said, not unkindly. I feel like someone who is trying very hard to assess the situation clearly, Celine said, and finding that the situation has opinions of its own about what is relevant. Mara's expression shifted slightly. It was the shift that meant, I am not going to say I told you so, but I thought this might happen. That is a clinical description, she said. What is the plain description? Celine looked at the window. She looked at her hands. She thought about steady hands and lamplit tents and 6 months of road, and the morning after the war tent when she had ridden away telling herself it was finished. I think, she said carefully, that I am going to have to stop pretending the plain description does not exist. Mara said nothing. She did not need to. She was holding a sleeping baby who had her finger in a grip that showed no sign of releasing, and she sat in the chair in the south-facing room with the organized medicine chest and the view of the city below the palace hill, and she looked at Celine with the gray eyes that had been seeing clearly for 73 years, and she let the silence do what silence was for. Celine breathed. She breathed again. I am going to need you to stay, she said, not forever. She knew that was not possible. For a while, until things are more settled. Mara looked at the room. She looked at Fen. She looked at the medicine chest. The West Wing physician, she said. Is he competent? Reasonably. There will be things I can teach him, Mara said. I have been wanting to write up the Bonese method for years, and have not had a quiet room. There is a writing desk in the room next to this one, Celine said. I will need good candles, Mara said. My eyes are not what they were. I'll get you good candles. Mara looked at her. Fetch my bags, she said. I'll unpack while you get the candles. And introduce me to that king of yours before dinner. I want to look at him properly. Celine looked at the word yours. She did not correct it. She picked up the bags. She thought about the forward camp and the lamp burning low and the morning she had ridden away. She thought about the mountain of distance she had put between herself and the thing she was afraid of, and the way the distance had not, in the end, been sufficient to make the thing not real. She had run very far. She had been found. And standing in this room, with her son asleep and Mara's bags in her hands and the city below the window going about its afternoon business, she was beginning to understand that being found was not the disaster she had spent 8 months preparing for. It was, in fact, something else entirely. She was going to need more time to know what to call it. That was fine. She had, for the first time in a long time, more than enough time. Cale arrived that evening at his usual hour. He knocked. He came in when she answered. He stopped when he saw Mara in the chair. Celine watched this moment, watched him take in the older woman, the particular upright quality of her, the gray eyes that were already assessing him. She watched him do the thing he did with unexpected information, which was to absorb it without reacting while he placed it correctly. Then he said, "You're Mara." Mara looked at him. "I am." He looked at her with the full attention he brought to everything. He did not fill the silence. He waited. Mara looked at him for a long moment with the same completeness she had brought to patients and students in difficult situations for 50 years. Celine recognized this. It was the full reading, the one that Mara took before she decided. "Sit down," Mara said. He sat. In his usual chair, the one by the table, the chair that had developed a specific quality of being his chair over 6 weeks of evenings, the way things developed identity through consistent use. Mara looked at him in the chair. She looked at Celine. She looked at the medicine chest and at Fen asleep in the cot. She conducted this survey with the thoroughness of someone gathering data for a conclusion. Then she said to Cale, "She would not have told me what you are to her. She is careful with those words. But I have known her for 20 years and I can read what she does not say." She looked at him directly. "Do you understand what she has done to be here?" Cale held her gaze. "Yes." "Tell me," Mara said, not testing, confirming. He told her. He told her accurately and completely. He did not take credit where he had not earned it, and he did not minimize where he had been absent or late or insufficient. He said, "I was told on a Wednesday evening. I rode north on a Thursday morning. I spent 6 months pretending the situation did not require action. This was a failure of honesty on my part, and not something I intend to repeat." He said this to a 73-year-old woman he had met approximately 4 minutes ago. Mara listened. She asked 2 questions. Both were specific, the kind that cut to the point beneath the point. He answered both without deflecting. At the end, Mara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She is not easy." She said it not as a warning but as a fact requiring acknowledgement. She thinks before she feels, and then she examines both, and then she decides, and the deciding takes time and cannot be rushed. I know this because I taught her most of it. Cale looked at Celine briefly, then back at Mara. "I know," he said, "and you can wait for the deciding." "I have been waiting," he said. "I expect to continue waiting for as long as it takes." Mara looked at him for the last time with the full assessment. She looked at the room. She looked at her hands. She chose a room with south-facing windows, she said. This was not directly related to anything they had been discussing. She said it the way she said things that were simultaneously observations and something more. "I know," Cale said. "That is a good sign," Mara said. "She only chooses rooms she intends to stay in." A pause. Celine looked at the window. The city below was going into its evening. The light was the particular quality of late afternoon, golden and specific and already becoming something else. She had chosen a room with south-facing windows. She had not thought about it at the time. She had looked at the specifications, good light, room for a chest, and this room had met them and so she had chosen it. But Mara was right. She was always right about the things under the things. Celine did not choose rooms she intended to leave easily. Cale looked at her across the table. She looked back. He said nothing. She said nothing. They were past the place where either of them needed to fill every silence. Mara, who had a trained eye for the kind of silence that did not need her in it, stood up with the deliberateness of her bad knee and picked up one of her bags. "I will see the room with the writing desk," she said. "Celine, the candles." She moved toward the door. She stopped and looked at Cale. "Come for dinner," she said. "I cook better than whatever this palace kitchen has been sending. You will tell me about the northern garrison situation while we eat. Celine has told me almost nothing useful about the kingdom's current state, and I prefer to be informed." She went out. They heard her open the door of the next room, heard the bags go down, heard her begin to move around in the space with the efficient specificity of a person who arranged themselves in new places by immediate utility rather than comfort. Celine looked at the door she had gone through. Then she looked at Cale. "She likes you," Celine said. He looked at her. "She would not have stayed for dinner if she did not," Celine said. "She leaves rooms when she has decided she does not like someone. She has done it in the middle of sentences. She has done it to a provincial lord, to a visiting physician from the south, and once to a patient who was not actually ill." Cale was quiet for a moment. What did she not like about the patient who was not actually ill? She said he was wasting space that real patients needed. She paused. She was correct. He was malingering for attention. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. The shape of one that had decided to stay rather than closing. She looked at it. She looked at him. She thought, there it is again. The thing she had been not looking at directly for 8 months. The thing she had been managing around the edges of. The thing that had made her hand hesitate at a tent flap in a forward camp at 4 a.m. She thought, I am going to have to stop walking around the edge of it. Not tonight. Not yet. But soon. She looked at the window. She looked at Fen. She thought about Mara next door choosing which side of the desk she would write at. I'll get the candles, she said. And then I'll tell you what to bring for dinner. Because Mara is correct that she cooks better than the palace kitchen. She got up. She went past him, and as she went he did not reach out and she did not stop, but there was the thing in the air between them. The same thing that had been in the air since the war tent, and that had not, for all the distance she had put between herself and it, diminished at all. And they both knew it was there, and neither of them said so because they were both people who chose words with care, and the right words had not arrived yet. They would. She had stopped being afraid of that. She went out into the corridor and down toward the supply room for good candles, and behind her, the room with the south-facing windows held the lamp burning low, and the cot with the sleeping baby, and the chair by the table that had become specifically his chair over 6 weeks of evenings. She had chosen a room she intended to stay in. She was beginning, finally, to understand exactly what that meant. Fen was 2 months old when Celine stopped calling it managing, and started calling it living. She did not mark this change with a decision or an announcement. It arrived the way most real changes arrived, not all at once but in accumulation, until one morning she was in the East Wing corridor on her way to see a patient, and she realized she knew the way without thinking about it. And then she realized she knew the names of the kitchen staff and the sound of the different guards' footsteps and which lamp in the formal wing always burned too low. And she had stopped noting these things as information to be filed against future need, and was simply knowing them the way you knew things about a place you lived. She lived here. The recognition was not dramatic. It was quiet and complete, the way true things tended to be once they arrived. She went to see her patient, the stable master's wife, whose persistent shoulder injury was finally responding to the combination of treatments Celine had been running for 3 weeks. And she did the work with the thoroughness she always brought to it. And she gave the stable master's wife her report and her instructions, and she came back to the East Wing and found Clara at the table with her accounts spread out, and Mara at the writing desk in the next room with the door open, which was as close to company as Mara tolerated when she was writing. It was ordinary. It was busy. It was full of the specific daily texture that made up a real life rather than a temporary arrangement. Fen was awake in his cot, working at the subject of his own hands with the intense scholarly focus he had developed in the past 2 weeks. He had recently discovered that he could make different sounds on purpose, and he had strong opinions about this. She sat down. She watched him for a moment. She thought about the forward camp, the lamp burning low, the wound along the ribs and the needle case and the steady hands. She thought about the morning after and the road south and the 6 months of distance she had put between herself and the thing she was afraid of. She thought about what she had been afraid of, specifically. Not him, or not primarily him. She had been afraid of the thing he represented, the category of outcome where she became defined by her connection to him rather than by herself, where the work and the thought and the 12 years of training dissolved into a relationship, where she became an appendage of enormous power rather than a person of her own. She had seen this happen to women. She had treated women in its aftermath, women who had stopped existing in their own right, and had not known how to exist again once the connection changed. She had been terrified of becoming that. She looked at the medicine chest. She looked at the space she had made here, the patience, the work, the rhythm of days that were built around what she could do rather than what she was attached to. She was not that. She had not become that. What she had become was harder to name. She was still herself, still the healer, still the planner, still the woman who left advance rent and burned the journals that could be used against her, and built a market town life from skill alone. And she was also, now, something that lived alongside those things. She was in love with him. She had known this for a while. She had been examining it from a safe distance the way you examined something that would change the room when you brought it in, making sure you understood its dimensions first. Now she had understood its dimensions and she had the room to bring it into, and there was no reason left to keep it at a distance except the general human reluctance to say a large thing out loud that you have only been saying quietly inside. She was going to say it. Not because the situation demanded it, not because time was pressing, but because it was true, and she was a person who preferred reality to management. and managing around the edges of the largest true thing in the room had become the only thing she was still doing out of habit rather than choice. He came that evening. He knocked. She answered. He looked at her face when she opened the door. His face did the thing that had been doing it for weeks. The slight adjustment of his attention that meant he was reading something specific in her expression. He was very good at this. She had stopped finding it unsettling. "Come in," she said. He came in. He went to the cot first, which was his habit. He looked at Fen. Fen was asleep now with the total commitment of someone who had worked hard at the Hands investigation and needed to recover. "He was awake for 4 hours today," Celine said. "He has theories about his hands." "Are they good theories?" "They seem well researched." He looked at the baby for another moment. Then he turned and sat in his chair. He had, without discussing it, started bringing things in the evenings. Not large things, not gestures designed to mean something, just the small practical gifts of a person who was paying attention. 2 weeks ago he had brought a better quality of candle than the palace supply room provided, after a single mention by Celine that the current ones burned unevenly. Last week he had brought a book on Northern Province plant medicine that had been published in the capital's academic press and that she had not known existed. Tonight he brought a small clay pot that she recognized as a specific cold weather salve she had been ordering from a supplier. "I found the maker in the market district," he said. "She said she can provide it directly." Celine looked at the pot. She looked at him. She thought, he has been learning the details of my work and finding ways to support them without making a production of it. She thought, this is what caring looked like in a person who expressed it through action. She thought, all right, it is time. "I need to tell you something," she said. He looked at her, fully present, the way he always was. "I have been deciding for a while," she said. "The kind of deciding that takes the full time it takes and cannot be compressed. And I am done deciding, and I need to tell you what I have decided." He said nothing. He waited. "I am in love with you," she said. She said it plainly, the way she said everything that mattered, not soft, not performing, just accurate. "I have been in love with you for a long time. I spent most of that time dealing with the situation rather than saying so, which was the right choice for the situation and is no longer necessary." He was very still. She looked at him. She did not look away first. She had stopped doing that. He stood up. He crossed the room. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to look up slightly, which she did without adjusting her expression. He said, "Celine." She said, "I know." He said, "I have been waiting. I know. Since the tent." She looked at him. "Since the tent," she said. "Both of us." He put his hand on her face. Very carefully. The specific carefulness of a large man with something he was aware was not indestructible, which was, she had come to understand, the way he held everything he valued. She let him. She put her hand over his and held it there. They stayed like that for a moment that was not any specific length. The lamp was burning steadily. Fen slept. Mara was in the next room and almost certainly aware of everything that was happening and was, in the way she managed such things, carefully finding new words to write until the room stopped needing her attention. "I am still not going to apologize for any of it," she said. Her voice was the same, low and calm and doing more than the words. "I have never asked you to," he said. "And I am still going to be difficult," she said. "I do not know how to be easy, and I am not going to learn." "I know," he said. Something lived in his voice that she had heard before only at the very edge of moments. In the morning light in Vara's Cross. In the council chamber when she had said the thing about Fen's status. In the evening she signed her name next to his. Something that had not been asking permission. "I am going to keep working," she said. "Yes," he said. "And the conditions stand." "They stand." She looked at him. She was building no more logic around it. The logic had served its purpose and was no longer needed. She had run very far. She had been found. She had negotiated and established and signed documents and stood in front of 12 council members and told them exactly what she was. She had built a room she intended to stay in, and she had filled it with the things that were hers, and she had sat in it every evening with this person, and had honest conversations, and she had stopped, gradually and then completely, being afraid of what the honest conversations might mean. What they meant was this, right here, his hand on her face and her hand over his, and the specific truth of it filling the room the way sunlight filled south-facing windows. She was not going to manage around it anymore. She said nothing else. There was nothing left that needed saying first. He stayed, not as a concession or a negotiation, because this was where he was supposed to be, and they both knew it, and the knowing had been true since a tent in a forward camp, and a lamp burning low in the steady hands of a healer who was afraid of infected wounds and had looked at him and said so. In the morning, Mara came in early, with the specific directness of a person who was going to comment on the situation and had decided the timing. She looked at Celine. She looked at the room. She asked no questions. "I need better light on the west side of the writing desk," she said. "The candles are set wrong." "I'll fix it," Celine said. Mara looked at her with the gray eyes that had been seeing clearly for 73 years. Something moved across her face, not a smile exactly, but the preparation for one. "You should eat," she said. "You look like someone who has been awake making decisions." "I have made my decision," Celine said. "Good," Mara said. "It is the correct one." She turned toward the corridor. "I will start the tea." She went out. Celine looked at the window. The morning light was coming through it in the long flat way it came in early, the particular quality of south-facing windows at this hour, which was the best light of the day. She had chosen this room for the light, and the room had given her the light, and every morning since arriving she had stood at this window and looked out at the city below and thought about where she was and how she had gotten here. She thought about it now. The whole long shape of it, the tent, the road, the months of building a quiet life from skill and will and the habit of continuing, the night Fen arrived in a sleet storm in a way station, the conversation in the room above the grain merchant's shop, the council chamber, the documents, the evenings, and this room. She was here, not by accident and not by force, by a long series of choices that she had made with open eyes, each one building toward this morning. She was a healer. She had spent her entire adult life keeping things alive that might otherwise not make it. She had kept herself alive. She had kept Fen alive. She had, slowly and with considerable effort, kept the thing she was most afraid of alive. The specific self she had built. The person who thought clearly and worked hard, and refused to be defined by anything except what she actually was. It was all still here. It had all survived. She was going to be fine, not fine as in the end of difficulty. She was not so optimistic as to think the council or the politics or the complication would resolve into simplicity. The next years were going to be what they were going to be, with all the texture and challenge that entailed. But fine in the way that mattered most, herself, whole, standing in a room she had chosen, with good light coming in the windows. Fen woke. He made the questioning sound. She turned from the window and went to him. She picked him up. He was warm and small, and already looking at her with the intense, specific focus he had started bringing to faces in the past week. The focus of someone who was trying to learn the world by memorizing the things in it that mattered most to them. "Good morning," she said. He looked at her. He made a new sound, not the question sound, something longer, something with a different shape. It was his best attempt, at 2 months old, at saying something back. She held him and looked out the window. Below, the city was waking into its morning. The market district was already moving. The river caught the early light and threw it back. The hills beyond the city were the pale blue of early spring. Everything was still being written. She was very glad to be writing it. The letter from Lord Edworth arrived that afternoon. It was addressed to her specifically, which was new. The previous council correspondence had been addressed to the king regarding matters related to her, which was the political way of doing things, discussing her around her rather than including her. This one had her name on the envelope in the careful script of the council secretary. She opened it. It was brief. It confirmed that the formal representations made by the 3 noble houses had been reviewed, and that the council's majority position was that the current arrangement, the healer Celine of Mara's house practicing from the East Wing with the accompanying formal agreement, was within acceptable precedent and would not require further procedural intervention. She read it twice. It was not warmth. It was not acceptance in the human sense. It was the language of institutions acknowledging a fact that was not going to go away, which was a specific and limited thing. But it was also the language of institutions agreeing to stop actively contesting a fact, which was more useful than warmth. She set the letter on the table. Clara looked up from her accounts. "Good news?" "Procedural news," Celine said, "which in political terms is good." Clara considered this. "I sold 4 bolts of the Southern Blue today," she said. "That is also good." "That is unambiguously good," Celine said. Clara smiled. She went back to her accounts. This was something Celine had come to understand about Clara over the months. She experienced victories cleanly, without needing to extend them. She felt the satisfaction and moved forward. This was a quality Celine found genuinely admirable and was still working on developing in herself. She took the letter to Cale that evening. He read it. He set it down. He looked at her. "This was Edworth's doing," he said. "He sent it to you directly." "I know." He would not have done that if he had not decided something about you. She looked at the letter. What did he decide? That you are not going anywhere, Cale said, and that he would rather have you as a known quantity than as an ongoing uncertainty. He paused. Edworth is a practical man. So am I, Celine said. So he has concluded, Cale said. She was quiet for a moment. She picked up the letter and put it in the small box she was using for documents that needed keeping, next to the signed agreement and Mara's first letter from the previous autumn, the one that had arrived in Vera's Cross 2 weeks after she sent hers, and that had said only, I knew it would work out. Stop writing every other week. Come see me when things settle. You are doing what you should be doing. She had read that letter 9 times. She put the Edworth letter in the box and closed it. Roe asked me something today, Cale said. She looked at him. He asked if the matter of the search was considered closed. He met her eyes. He meant the 6 months, the tracking network, the way it started. She looked at the box with the documents in it. She looked at the window and the city below. What did you tell him? She said. I told him it was closed on my end, Cale said, and that I could not answer for yours. She thought about this. She thought about Roe, who had spent months following a trail built from grateful patience and advance rent payments, and the particular forensic skill of reading a person from the evidence they left, rather than from what they told you. She thought about the pressed flower from the border province that he had found behind the loose stone, which she had completely forgotten she had left there. Tell him it is closed, she said. On mine too. A pause. It was necessary, she said. Not for him, she did not owe him a justification. For herself, because she wanted to say it clearly. What I did, the running, the planning, it was necessary at the time. Yes, he said. And it is also done. Yes. She looked at him. You are not going to say anything else about it. No, he said. There is nothing else to say. This was, she thought, one of the things about him that she had not expected. The specific quality of his acceptance. It was not easy acceptance, not the kind that came from not caring. It was the kind that came from having thought about it fully, and decided, and then being done deciding. He had the ability to close a thing properly without leaving loose threads. This was, she had learned, a rarer quality than it appeared. She was still working on it herself in various places. Mara appeared in the doorway. She had spent the afternoon with Aldous, the palace physician, which had been Celine's idea and had gone better than expected. Aldous, it turned out, had spent 30 years wanting to ask someone trained at Mara's house about the cold compress method for fever reduction, and Mara had spent 30 years wanting someone to ask, and 2 hours later they had filled 4 pages of notes and agreed to reconvene on Thursday. Dinner, Mara said to both of them. She looked at Cale. You can tell me about the garrison appointment that has been pending. I have an opinion about northern garrison commanders, and whether experience in border territory is more important than administrative competence. She turned and went back down the corridor. Cale looked at Celine. She has been in the palace for 3 weeks, Celine said. She now has opinions about garrison appointments. She has been asking Roe questions, Cale said. He has been answering them because he says it is easier than not answering. That is exactly right, Celine said. It is always easier to answer Mara's questions than to not answer them. You learned this. He looked at her with the expression that was not quite a smile, and had been appearing more often, the one that lived in the area of genuinely pleased. I think I am learning it, he said. Good, she said. Come on. They went to dinner. Mara had commandeered the small dining room off the East Wing kitchen, which was not the formal dining room but was more honest, and she had arranged it with the efficiency she brought to every space. The table cleared except for what was needed, the candles positioned correctly, the food, which the kitchen had produced under Mara's specific direction, set out without ceremony. They sat. Clara was already there, having come in through the kitchen because she had been reviewing supply lists with the kitchen manager, which was Clara's way of making herself both useful and informed simultaneously. They ate. Mara asked about the garrison appointment, and Cale answered, and Mara said she believed administrative competence was learnable, but genuine knowledge of border conditions was not, and Roe, who had been summoned at some point by a process Celine was not entirely clear on, agreed with this, which surprised everyone including Mara. It was loud, in the way of tables where different people with strong views were all willing to speak them at once. It was warm with the particular warmth of shared food and candles, and the specific kind of comfort that came from being with people who knew you, and did not require you to be anything other than what you actually were. Fen, in his sling against Celine's chest, made his experimental sounds into the general noise and was not concerned about the crowd. She sat at the table with her son and her mentor and her friend, and the man she had been afraid of for 8 months, and had run from, and had been found by, and had stopped being afraid of, and she ate the food and spoke when she had something to say, and listened when she did not. And the evening moved through itself with the particular quality of evenings that are not being managed or survived or held at arm's length, simply lived. She had come a long way to get to this table. She had run very far, and then she had stopped running, and then she had walked back in, deliberately, on her own terms, with her conditions met, and her document signed, and her eyes open. She was here. The lamp burned well. Clara was making a point about fabric quality to Roe, who was listening with the patience of a man who had learned that Clara's points generally led somewhere practical. Mara was telling Cale something about the northern garrison that she had remembered mid-meal and considered urgent. Fen had fallen asleep against her. Celine looked at the table. She looked at the people around it. She thought, this is what I built from the outside in. She thought, this is what all of it was for. She thought quietly, in the place underneath thought where the true things lived. I am home. Not because of the palace or the capital or the signed documents or the council letter in the box by her bed. Not because of any of the external circumstances that had brought her here. Because she was sitting in a room with the people she had chosen, doing work she believed in a life she had built with her own hands, from the materials available to her, and it was enough. It was, in fact, considerably more than enough. It was everything.